He was still called Jon Snow then, though the name felt heavier on his tongue with each passing day. He'd heard rumors that Lord Eddard Stark was not his father. Rumors whispered and repeated in the shadows of the Red Keep and along the back alleys of King's Landing. Most folk dismissed such talk as the idle chatter of scullions, whores, and wine-soaked soldiers, but there were always those pieces of rumor that stuck uncomfortably in Jon's mind. Perhaps it was the way they said it, or perhaps it was that gnawing question that had haunted him his entire life. Who was his mother? He had never truly believed he was Ned Stark's get, for that gentle, honorable man had never once mentioned the woman from whom Jon had sprung. And Lord Stark had been so stern, so determined that Jon keep to the shadows, as if even acknowledging him more openly might risk a discovery that could shatter the realm. It was the night after Ned Stark's execution that everything began to shift. The world had gone dark for Sansa, who was trapped in the Red Keep beneath the cruel sneers of King Joffrey, and dark too for Arya, who had disappeared somewhere in the crowd. The City Watch had turned cloaks, betraying Ned, and the Lannisters reigned with their new puppet king. Jon might have been miles away at the Wall under normal circumstances, but a twist of fate, his desire for one last farewell to his sisters, had led him south with Ned and the girls. He had lived in the Stark retinue, quiet as a ghost, overshadowed by the events swirling around him. When Joffrey had ordered Ned Stark's head lopped off, Jon had watched from a hidden vantage. He had been too far to change anything and too stunned to even cry out. There was a horror in the finality of that moment, an all-consuming sense that the world was ending. Perhaps if he had been bolder, or if the gods had endowed him with a different destiny, he might have rushed forward and died with his father. No, with the man he had always called father. But whatever the truth of Ned Stark's relation to him, a part of Jon died when that sword fell, and he was left with only a raw ache, a sorrow that gave way to anger far too easily. He spent the next few days hidden among the small folk in King's Landing, changing his appearance as best he could. No one looked for him in the cramped inns near Flea Bottom, where the stench of rot and cooked onions and sour wine clung to the air. He wore a heavy cloak with a hood that concealed his northern features, his dark eyes, and the pallor of his skin. His direwolf, Ghost, was nowhere to be found, for Jon had left him behind at the manse the Starks occupied, afraid that a giant white wolf would draw too much attention. He regretted it now. His head was spinning with questions, with heartbreak, with hatred for the Lannisters. And somewhere deep within his soul, there was a curiosity that bubbled up with the thought that maybe, just maybe, the whispers of his parentage were true. He stole away in the night to the Red Keep itself, scaling a disused postern gate and slipping into the courtyard. The sense of danger thrummed in his veins. This was madness. It went against everything Ned had ever taught him. Stay honorable, keep your vows, do your duty. But the vow to the Night's Watch had not yet been taken. He had been so close to the Black, it was true, but Ned had brought him south for reasons unknown, so that vow was still unborn, an unspoken oath. Now that Ned was gone, Jon had no illusions about where his life would lead if he stayed in King's Landing. If discovered, he would be clapped in irons and likely executed as a traitor's bastard. But he had a powerful compulsion to find something, anything, that could give meaning to the swirling tempest of betrayal and pain inside him. He found himself wandering through corridors where the torches flickered, weaving dancing shadows across the walls. He passed a guard post or two, but gold cloaks seldom paid mind to a servant boy with a half-hidden face. Finally, he reached the library tower, not because he intended to read the histories, but because he remembered vaguely that Ned Stark had once sought answers in a hidden passage there. The tower was near deserted at such a late hour. Old scrolls and texts lined the walls, the pungent smell of dust and old parchment saturating the air. Jon lit a small candle and began searching. He knew not exactly what he looked for, but anything that might confirm or deny the secrets swirling in his mind would do. He almost gave up. The hours dragged by, and all he found were old genealogies, lineages of House Targaryen, House Baratheon, House Lannister, House Stark. Yet even those volumes left him unsettled. Perhaps he thought he might find a footnote. Rhaegar Targaryen had one surviving child, secreted away. That was madness. Still, the mere speculation seized him. They said Rhaegar Targaryen had loved Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister. If it were true, and if that love had borne fruit, might that child be Jon Snow? He set the last tome aside and sighed, leaning against the ancient wood of the reading table. The candle flames sputtered and flickered, casting dancing shadows on his fingers. Then he sensed movement out of the corner of his eye, and he jerked up, heart pounding, prepared to fight or flee. Someone stood in the threshold of the library, an old man with stooped shoulders and ink-stained fingers. Jon recognized him as Grand Maester Pycelle, who in the flickering candlelight appeared more vulture than man. Jon's first instinct was to bolt, but Pycelle did something unexpected. He whispered for Jon to stay. "I know who you are," the Grand Maester croaked, voice trembling. "Or at least I suspect." Jon said nothing, only hovered near the table, considering whether he should try to silence the old man. Pycelle's eyes glimmered with some combination of calculation and fear. "I served many kings, boy Aerys, Robert, and now Joffrey. And I served the hand of the king, your father, or the man you believed your father." Jon's heart hammered. The old man knew something. Perhaps it was a trap. Yet there was no immediate sound of footsteps or the rattle of armor. No sign that a troop of gold cloaks waited just beyond the door. Pycelle came closer, the shuffle of his slippers echoing in the silent library. "I do not mean to cause you harm. Indeed, I have no love for your father's killer or for the cruelty that has taken hold of King's Landing. I hold to the realm's good. Or so I tell myself." Jon swallowed hard. The old man's watery eyes studied him, and Jon realized that Pycelle's knowledge, whatever it was, could be precious. "What do you know?" Jon asked, voice low and tense. Pycelle glanced around, as though the shadows might be listening. "Lord Eddard Stark came to me in confidence, with a question of lineage." He paused to swallow, and a whiff of sour breath made Jon want to recoil. He believed that Robert Baratheon's children were not truly his. He was right about that, of course. But I also know he researched something else, something about Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. I recall a letter from Lord Howland Reed once upon a time, referencing a secret never to be spoken of. Lord Eddard confronted me with certain curiosities. He demanded to know if the Citadel held records of births outside marriage for Prince Rhaegar. I said to him that any such records had likely been destroyed in the rebellion. But I suspect, as he did, that you may be the proof that House Targaryen's line is not so extinct as King Robert hoped. Jon's breath came faster, each draw a quiet thunder in his chest. "Why are you telling me this now?" Pycelle's thin lips twitched. "Because I am old, and I dislike the smell of rot that pervades King's Landing these days. I knew Prince Rhaegar from afar. He was a good man, or so many claimed. A dreamer, a harp player, a man who believed in prophecy. I will not betray you to Queen Cersei or King Joffrey, for what that is worth." Jon stared, uncertain whether to believe. He wondered if Pycelle was playing some deeper game, or if the gods were simply offering him a path forward. "If what you say is true," Jon said slowly, "that would make me the rightful heir to the Iron Throne." Pycelle tapped a bony finger on the table. "Well, by the laws of succession, if Rhaegar was indeed your father and you were born in wedlock, though that is uncertain, and if your father had no other children, and if your father was indeed the rightful heir before the rebellion, then, in theory, yes, you would have a claim. Of course, the realm has recognized Robert Baratheon and now Joffrey Baratheon as king. But in these times, claims can be pressed with swords, young man." A swirl of fear and possibility churned in Jon's gut. He had never cared for power, never yearned to sit on the Iron Throne. Indeed, he had dreaded the idea of leadership beyond perhaps being a ranger in the Night's Watch. But Ned Stark was dead now, and the Lannisters had shown their cruelty. Was it not a moral imperative to challenge them if he had a rightful claim? Could it be that destiny demanded he stand up for those who suffered under Joffrey's tyranny? Pycelle's voice drew him from his reverie. "I would suggest caution, my lord, if I may call you that. There are many who would see you dead the moment they heard even a whisper that you might be Rhaegar's son. Joffrey's mother especially. Cersei is not kind to threats. She has her father's cunning as well as her own brand of ruthlessness. Declare yourself too soon, and you will lose your head as Eddard Stark did." Jon's fists clenched. In the flickering candlelight, the old genealogical records cast ominous shadows on the walls. "What should I do?" he asked. Pycelle stared at him for a long moment. "Find allies if you can. Go north, go anywhere beyond the Lannister grasp. A dragon alone in a den of lions stands little chance. And remember, knowledge can be a sword as well as steel. The truth is dangerous. Wield it wisely." With that, the Grand Maester turned and shuffled away, leaving Jon's mind in turmoil. Jon lingered there, listening to the slow drip of melted wax from the candle. He realized, with a start, that the old man had effectively confirmed what Jon had only begun to suspect. Rhaegar Targaryen had once taken Lyanna Stark as his bride, or at least loved her enough to father a child. Jon's entire life, he had believed himself some nameless woman's bastard. Now, the notion that he was not Ned Stark's get but Rhaegar Targaryen's was too large to swallow all at once. It made him tremble, not with fear alone, but with something akin to destiny. If this was true, then all the tragedies that had befallen House Stark, the cruelty that had ended Ned's life, and the injustice that might one day claim his sisters too, might be undone, or at least avenged, by a Targaryen's rightful fury. Yet he was alone, hidden in the library of his enemy's stronghold. Dawn was approaching, and soon the Red Keep would fill with courtiers, guards, and Lannisters. Jon took one last look at the genealogies, biting the inside of his cheek. Then he extinguished the candle and slipped out into the corridor. He spent the next days grappling with the knowledge. Slipping through the city in a hooded cloak, he encountered whispers of rebellion. Robb Stark, the new king in the north, was rallying northern lords against the throne. Stannis Baratheon was rumored to have discovered that Joffrey was no true Baratheon, but a product of incest. Renly Baratheon had crowned himself as well. The War of the Five Kings had begun, and the realm bled. Amid this chaos, no one noticed a single young man with northern looks. Yet each time Jon emerged from the cramped inns of Flea Bottom, he felt eyes on him. The city was a nest of spies. One evening, as he returned to his rented room, he found a black figure waiting in the shadows of the cramped stairwell. Jon tensed, hand on the hilt of his dagger. The figure lifted his head to reveal a scarred face. It was Lothier Brune, once a sworn sword to Peter Baelish if the stories were correct. Jon's blood chilled. If Lothier was here, perhaps it meant Littlefinger was too. Or perhaps he was there on another's behalf. "You're the bastard boy," Lothier rasped quietly. "Lord Baelish wants a word." Jon almost bolted, but the sword at Lothier's hip and the calm demeanor told him that if he tried to run, steel would find him before he reached the bottom step. "Don't make this harder, boy. Lord Baelish doesn't want a scene." Jon weighed his odds, then nodded. If Peter Baelish had discovered him, perhaps there was a reason. Maybe there was an opportunity in it. Perhaps the man wanted to kill him. Either way, flight in the stairwell was futile. He followed Lothier through twisting alleys until they reached an out-of-the-way building near the Street of Silk. A secret door at the side opened, revealing a plush interior that smelled of scented candles and rosewater. Littlefinger waited by a small table, dressed in soft velvets of dark green and black, a mockingbird pin glinting on his chest. He smiled that mocking smile of his as Jon stepped inside. "You have a penchant for secrets, my boy?" Littlefinger purred, gesturing for Jon to sit. "Wine." Jon shook his head. He did not trust this man, nor did he want to let his guard down. Littlefinger poured wine for himself. "As you will. I found that a bit of Dornish red loosens tongues nicely. But we can converse plainly if you prefer." He sat and sipped, eyes gleaming with mischief. "You surprise me, Jon Snow." "Oh, pardon. Should I call you by another name now?" Jon's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Littlefinger laughed softly. "Oh, but I think you do. Word travels quickly in the Red Keep, especially among those who pay close attention to the movements of Grand Maester Pycelle. The old man is nothing if not predictable. You had a conversation, yes?" He told you certain things. Jon said nothing, though his heart pounded in his chest. He wondered if he should draw steel, but that would likely be the last thing he ever did. Littlefinger showed no sign of fear. Indeed, he looked amused, as though this were a game of Syvas he had already won. "I won't belabor the point," the man said, swirling the wine in his cup. "If you are who I think you are, you have a claim that could be quite disruptive to Joffrey's rule. And if there's one thing I love, it's a little disruption that might profit me." He leaned forward. "Tell me, do you intend to claim the Iron Throne?" Jon's hands clenched on the arm of the chair. I don't know." Littlefinger's laugh was like silk sliding against a blade. "A wise answer. The times are tumultuous, young Snow. We have Joffrey, Renly, Stannis, Robb Stark, and even Balon Greyjoy fancies a crown. People speak of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, a young dragon queen with 3 newly hatched dragons, though that rumor may be no more than a bedtime tale. Yet here you are, possibly the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, hidden in the heart of the lion's den. If that were confirmed, and if you could gather support, imagine how many would flock to you. Rhaegar was beloved by many, especially among the older generation. They might see in you the chance to return the realm to a Targaryen restoration, especially if the alternative is the incest-born cruelty of Joffrey." Jon felt nauseated. The idea of seizing the throne was more than he could handle. Yet the memory of Ned's head rolling from the block tore through him. The Lannisters had shown no mercy, and Joffrey reveled in sadism. Could Jon simply walk away from a rightful claim, especially if it might save his sisters and avenge his father's death? He steadied himself. "And if I wanted to do so, why would I need your help?" "Oh, you might not," Littlefinger said, a playful lilt in his tone. "But King's Landing is a viper's nest of secrets and rivalries. You have little knowledge of the game, and you are alone. You need coin, swords, alliances. I can help with all 3, if you can give me something in return." His thin mustache twitched. "Power begets power, dear boy. I can spin a web of whispers to create an opportunity. But you'll have to trust me." Jon nearly scoffed. Trust Peter Baelish, the man who orchestrated intrigues that would make a spider blush? He considered, though, that in King's Landing, truth was seldom straightforward. One had to make deals with devils just to survive. "What do you want in return?" Littlefinger sipped his wine again, a cat-like grin on his lips. "For now, simply your understanding that, if you come to power, you will remember who helped you. The details can be worked out later. But for a start, we can't have you skulking about Flea Bottom risking recognition. I can arrange a safe place for you to stay, resources to move quietly, perhaps. If you accept, we can discuss how you might prove your parentage." Jon's mind swirled. Could it be that easily manipulated? Could he even begin to trust Littlefinger's proposition? Yet what was the alternative? Rot in a dingy room, waiting for Joffrey's men to drag him before the king. Or flee King's Landing altogether, leaving Sansa to her fate, and forsaking any chance to right the wrongs done to his family? At length, Jon nodded curtly, though he kept his guard up. "I'll hear what you have to say." Littlefinger's smile deepened. "Good. Now, to prove your parentage, you'll need something substantial. Memories and speculation aren't enough. The best would be a witness who was there at your birth or documents that confirm Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen were wed. Some claim they were, others claim they were not. If the marriage was legitimate, your claim is all the stronger. I suspect Lord Howland Reed may hold the answers you need, as he was Ned Stark's companion at the Tower of Joy. If you could secure his testimony, it might serve as strong proof. Alas, I hear House Reed is in the neck, loyal to Robb Stark. That complicates matters." Jon thought of the reclusive Lord Reed, the man who had helped Ned win the war at the Tower of Joy. Ned had always spoken fondly of Howland. If Howland Reed held the secret, that would be the surest path to confirm or deny Jon's heritage. "Then I must go north," Jon said. Littlefinger tilted his head. "Perhaps, but traveling north is dangerous now, with Lannister armies about and the Riverlands a battleground. You might do better to remain hidden until an opportunity arises. If you reveal yourself to your half-brother Robb, The king in the north might see you as a threat or an asset. Hard to say which. He might welcome you with open arms, or he might fear a Targaryen claim. And we mustn't discount the whispers of Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea, if she truly lives. Jon clenched his jaw. Robb is my brother, even if we don't share blood in the way we once thought. He is honorable. He won't harm me. Perhaps not intentionally, Littlefinger said softly, but he is surrounded by northern lords who might prefer an independent kingdom. Your presence complicates that dream. Still, that is a matter for later. For now, you need a place to lay low until we can arrange your departure from King's Landing. Allow me to help. And so it was that Jon Snow, or the boy who might be Rhaegar's son, found himself moving to a hidden apartment in the depths of the city, courtesy of Petyr Baelish. It was a discreet arrangement, small but comfortable, with a heavy door that locked from within and no windows that faced busy streets. A single door at the back led to a twisting alley. Food was delivered daily by an older woman who never spoke. Jon passed time honing his sword skills in the cramped space, practicing with the dagger, pacing. He was restless, uncertain, and if trusting Baelish was a grand mistake. Yet days passed into weeks, and no gold cloaks came battering down his door. During that time, he learned more of the city's rumor mill. Varys the Spider flitted about in the Red Keep, pulling his own strings behind the scenes. Tyrion Lannister had taken up the position of Hand of the King, and word was he was at odds with his sister Cersei. The realm descended further into chaos. The Riverlands burned under Lannister raids, Robb Stark had won a victory at Whispering Wood, and Renly Baratheon raised an army in the Reach to press his claim. Meanwhile, Joffrey presided over King's Landing with an iron fist, humiliating Sansa Stark in court whenever it pleased him. Jon's blood boiled at the thought of Sansa's suffering. He was meant to protect her as her brother, if only a bastard brother. But in his mind, nothing had changed about their bond, even if his father had been a Targaryen. He grew more determined to do something. But what? A single man in hiding could not rescue her outright. And if he declared himself, he risked immediate confrontation with the Lannisters before he was ready. Then came the day when Littlefinger paid him a visit, slipping in through the back alley. He was alone, wearing a dark cloak, but he still carried himself with the same self-assured swagger. Jon, in the midst of sword practice, stopped and watched him warily. Littlefinger studied Jon's stance. You've improved. Good. You'll need that skill soon enough. He set down a pouch of coins on the small table. For your expenses, he explained. Now, we have an interesting development. King Joffrey means to hold a tourney in honor of his name day, a grand affair meant to shore up his legitimacy. Lords and knights from across the realm will come. Many of them might secretly resent the Lannisters. That could be your moment. Jon shook his head. You think I should walk into the tourney grounds and shout that I'm the rightful king? That's suicide. Hardly, Littlefinger said, but it might be an opportunity to meet certain people in private, forge alliances. Men who chafe under Lannister rule might be swayed if they believe a Targaryen heir exists. With enough gold and influence, who knows what could happen. Or, if you'd prefer a simpler route, we might use the chaos of the tourney to slip you and Sansa out of the city. But I sense you want something more. Jon frowned. It was true. Merely fleeing with Sansa would not avenge Ned nor bring any measure of justice to Joffrey. Yet the thought of Sansa locked in the Red Keep, at Joffrey's mercy, gnawed at him night and day. Do you have a plan? Littlefinger smirked. I always have plans. But the question is, do you have the will to see it done? The Game of Thrones is not for the faint of heart, dear boy. You must be prepared to take risks, to spill blood if necessary. Jon's memory flashed to the times Ned Stark had told him about mercy, about honor. But Ned was gone and the times were changed. If he was indeed a Targaryen, if he was to challenge Joffrey's rule, he might be forced to do things that would make a younger Jon Snow blanch. Tell me your plan, Jon said quietly. Littlefinger's eyes gleamed. We arrange for you to attend the tourney in disguise. I can secure an invitation for a knight who doesn't exist. Or perhaps you'll masquerade as a sellsword attached to some minor lord's retinue. Once there, you keep your eyes open, watch and wait. I will direct certain lords to meet with you privately, lords who might support a Targaryen claim. Meanwhile, I will ensure that certain key persons learn of your existence. Quietly. Not many, but enough to start a whisper campaign. The idea that Rhaegar's son is in King's Landing, ready to claim his birthright, that rumor will spread like wildfire in dry grass, if ignited properly. The lords who resent the Lannisters might approach you. Then, perhaps we can orchestrate a moment, near the end of the tourney, where you reveal yourself in some dramatic fashion. But only if we have enough swords behind you to withstand the immediate backlash from the throne. If not, we flee. Jon's chest tightened. The idea was outlandish, yet with how quickly the realm was fracturing, perhaps a dramatic reveal was exactly the kind of lightning strike needed. It's risky. Indeed, Littlefinger agreed. But if you truly want the throne, or if you want to avenge Lord Stark and save his daughter, you'll need to take a risk eventually. War is risk. Politics is risk. But first, you must be certain of your claim. Those lords will want proof. Jon nodded. And how do I get proof? Littlefinger's lips curved in a knowing smile. That is where Lord Varys comes in. He possesses little birds in every corner of the realm, perhaps even in the Citadel or in Dorne, where some Targaryen loyalists might keep records. A certain High Septon might even hold secrets about Rhaegar's rumored annulment from Princess Elia Martell, and subsequent marriage to Lyanna Stark. If that marriage was blessed by the faith, then your claim is unstoppable by traditional law. Jon almost laughed in disbelief at the swirl of conspiracies. You think Varys would help me? He might, Littlefinger said lightly, if he believes it serves the realm. Varys has an odd sense of loyalty to the realm. Or, if he sees you as a piece that can dethrone the Lannisters and create a more stable Seven Kingdoms, he might just risk it. But approach him carefully. The spider has his own webs, and you don't want to be caught in them. So began a new chapter in Jon's life, one of subterfuge and quiet alliances. Over the following weeks, he arranged secret meetings through Littlefinger's numerous contacts. He found himself slipping into the Red Keep again, not to the library, but to a dark alcove behind the throne room where he met Varys in hushed conversation. Varys wore his customary silk robes, his powdered face the picture of calm. His voice was soft, almost kindly, as he addressed Jon. So, he said, the wolf pup is a dragonling after all. Fascinating. I must admit, I suspected something of this sort when Lord Eddard Stark was sniffing about for genealogies. He was never one to intrude on others' affairs, unless there was a most pressing reason. Jon asked him directly, will you help me prove it? Varys inclined his head. I might if I find you to be the best hope for the realm. But that remains to be seen. You are young, untested, prone to emotion. The Iron Throne is a perilous seat. Many have lost their heads attempting to sit upon it. What manner of king would you be? Jon hesitated. He had never once envisioned himself as king. He thought of justice for Ned, for Sansa. He thought of the realm's peasants, suffering under the cruelty of the Lannisters. I would be a better king than Joffrey, he said, though it sounded weak to his ears. Varys gave a sympathetic nod. That bar is set quite low, my dear boy. But the realm deserves more than simply a king less monstrous than Joffrey. The realm needs peace, stability. War tears at the fabric of the Seven Kingdoms, and the common folk bleed. Tell me, if I help you, how might you govern differently? Jon swallowed. The question of governance was enormous, and he was woefully unprepared to answer. Yet he thought of the values Ned Stark had instilled in him, the sense of honor and fairness, the belief in the old gods but respect for the faith of the Seven. He also thought of the Targaryen legacy. Dragons, conquest, madness in some, greatness in others. I would try to rule with justice, he said haltingly. I would hear the cries of the common folk. I would unify the realm, not tear it apart. The Seven Kingdoms deserve better than tyranny. Varys studied him for a long moment, eyes flicking over Jon's dark hair, his somber expression. Finally, the spider nodded. Words are wind, but I sense sincerity in you. Very well. I can begin to search for documents, accounts from the High Septon who officiated Rhaegar's secret ceremony, if that ceremony indeed occurred. I can also see if any Targaryen loyalists still linger in King's Landing, or if there are any hidden septs that might hold partial records. But this will take time, and I cannot guarantee results. You must also know that if I commit to this path, my own life is at great risk. If discovered, I would be executed as a traitor by Queen Cersei. Jon inclined his head. I understand, and I appreciate it. I'll do my best to repay you if I succeed. Varys smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. You might find it is not me you need to repay, but the realm. Then he took his leave, drifting away as silently as a shadow. Thus Jon found himself an unwitting conspirator in a grand plot to dethrone King Joffrey. Each passing day, he practiced swordsmanship in the small apartment, studied the histories from borrowed tomes, and wrestled with the knowledge that he was forging alliances with men who were cunning and untrustworthy. Littlefinger was helpful, but it was clear he expected a generous reward if Jon succeeded. Varys was discreet and possibly genuine in his concern for the realm, but he was still the master of whispers, a man whose webs extended far beyond Jon's comprehension. Jon felt like a fish caught in a net, uncertain if he was swimming to freedom or deeper into entanglement. All the while, King Joffrey grew more cruel. Jon heard tales of Joffrey entertaining himself by ordering the Kingsguard to beat commoners, of how he tormented Sansa for her traitor father and traitor brother. The day came when news reached Jon that Joffrey had demanded Sansa strip before the court as punishment. She had managed to cling to some shred of dignity, but it was humiliating. The memory of Sansa's once innocent eyes haunted Jon. He wanted nothing more than to storm the Red Keep and whisk her away. But that would be suicide, and it would mean the end of the small progress he had made. Eventually, the name day tourney for King Joffrey arrived. The city stirred with unusual frenzy. Knights from various corners of the realm arrived in grand retinues, though the fighting in the Riverlands and beyond meant fewer turned up than in more peaceful times. Still, the stands were erected near the ruins of the Dragon Pit, and the city's small folk buzzed with excitement. Joffrey wanted to display his might, to show that despite the wars, King's Landing still lived in splendor under his rule. Littlefinger had arranged for Jon to serve as a squire for a hedge knight named Ser Roland of the Rosebush, an invented identity, of course, but given legitimacy by forged documents. Ser Roland was actually an older bravo hired by Baelish, a man who had fought in the Free Cities. He wore a full helm at all times to disguise his foreign features, and Jon, likewise, kept his head covered as he attended to the knight's armor and weapons. On the tourney grounds, Jon watched as Joffrey took his seat in the royal box alongside Cersei and Sansa. The Lannisters were resplendent in their crimson and gold, while Sansa wore a gown of pale blue that made her look like a faded ghost of her former self. Her face was composed, but Jon saw pain etched in her features. He gripped the straps of Ser Roland's saddle, his knuckles white. Soon, he thought. He only prayed that soon did not come too late. Men jousted in the lists, their horses snorting and stamping, lances splintering against shields. The small folk cheered or jeered, depending on the crest that galloped past. Jon kept to the shade of the pavilion, ensuring his face remained obscured. Throughout the day, Baelish drifted by once, wearing a sly smile. He gave Jon a barely perceptible nod, then moved on, greeting lords and ladies with an easy charm. Varys also appeared, tottering past in bright robes, offering little more than a subtle glance in Jon's direction. When evening approached, the jousting ended, and Joffrey commanded an archery contest for his amusement. Jon found himself edging closer to the royal box, under the pretense of carrying Ser Roland's gear. He felt a strange pull, a need to see Sansa up close, to reassure her that she was not alone. In the swirl of the crowd, he managed to position himself near the corner of the royal stands. Sansa was only a few yards away, gazing at the archers with listless eyes. Joffrey suddenly turned to her. "You're not even watching, my lady," he snapped. "Where is your courtesy? A queen must be attentive to the contests of her king." He backhanded her lightly across the cheek, causing the crowd to gasp. The blow was not hard enough to knock her down, but the humiliation was stark. Sansa's head turned sharply, and a red blush spread across her cheek. Jon's fists clenched. A rage bubbled within him so violently that he nearly forgot his disguise. He forced himself to remain still, though it felt like swallowing glass. The archers continued their contest, arrows whistling through the air. Joffrey chuckled at Sansa's discomfort, his voice dripping with malice. Jon felt the hot pulse of Targaryen fury in his veins, and the stark sense of honor that demanded he protect his sister. Night fell, and a great feast was held in the throne room, though it was less lavish than it might have been in times of peace. Jon, still disguised as a squire, lurked among the servants who carried trays of roast meats and honey cakes, observing the lords and ladies as they drank and exchanged pleasantries. Joffrey sat on the iron throne at the head of the hall, occasionally beckoning Sansa to do some humiliating small task, such as fill his wine cup or kneel before him. The court either laughed nervously or tried to look away. Tyrion Lannister was there, glancing at Joffrey with open distaste. Cersei watched everything with a calculating eye, her lips pressed tight. Littlefinger stood near a pillar, exchanging words with the Tyrells who had come from Highgarden. Varys drifted about, listening to conversations like a ghost. Jon tried to catch Sansa's gaze, but she never glanced in his direction. It was too risky to approach. If he revealed himself now, with no plan in place, the Kingsguard would cut him down. He retreated back to the servants' corridor, heart pounding. Was this how it would always be? Him lurking in shadows while Sansa suffered? He cursed himself for not acting sooner. But Baelish had insisted it was not yet time to make a grand move. Jon was no master of the game, yet he knew better than to charge in blindly. In the corridor, he was startled by the presence of a short man leaning against the wall. A man with mismatched eyes and a cunning expression. Jon recognized him as Bronn, Tyrion's sellsword companion. Bronn eyed Jon with lazy amusement. "You're a bit far from the stables, aren't you, squire?" Jon tensed. Had Bronn recognized him? Or was this a random encounter? "I was just looking for the kitchens," he lied. "Ser Roland wants me to fetch him more ale." Bronn chuckled. "Kitchens are that way." He jerked his thumb. Jon nodded and hurried on, trying not to show fear. As he turned the corner, he glanced back and saw Bronn still watching him with narrowed eyes. So much for total anonymity. Time passed, and the night's festivities wore on. At last, the court began to disperse. Joffrey dragged Sansa away, presumably back to her chambers or perhaps to torment her further. Jon seethed but kept his distance. When he returned to Ser Roland's tent, he found Littlefinger waiting inside, leaning casually against a wooden post. "How did it feel to watch him treat your sister that way?" Baelish asked softly. Jon's anger surged. "Don't taunt me," he growled. "Why didn't we do something?" Baelish arched a brow. "Because we're not ready. You'll have one chance at this. If you fail, Joffrey kills you and Sansa. This requires more than righteous fury, my dear boy. It requires cunning. That's why you need me. Now listen. There will be a feast in 2 days' time after the melee. That is when we'll make our move." Jon took a breath. "And what move is that?" Baelish's lips curved into a secretive smile. "We reveal you to certain key lords after the melee, in a private chamber. If they pledge their swords to you, we can spirit Sansa away that very night and declare your claim before the Red Keep's gates. The small folk are restless. If they see a Targaryen heir challenging Joffrey, they might rise. The gold cloaks could be swayed. Lord Janos Slynt is gone, replaced by men Tyrion trusts more than Cersei. But if we bribe the right captains, we might control the city watch. Meanwhile, I'll pay some of my men to cause confusion elsewhere, giving us a chance to hold the palace gates. Once Joffrey is cornered or forced to flee, you can claim the throne. Of course, it won't be without bloodshed, but these are the wages of war." The plan was audacious. Jon stared at Baelish, trying to gauge how realistic it was. Could they truly pull it off? Could the city watch be turned that easily? Could the small folk be roused to cheer a Targaryen in place of their current king? Maybe. Joffrey's rule was already unpopular, and rumors about the illegitimacy of his birth were spreading. Jon felt a surge of hope, but also dread. If it went wrong, it would mean all-out slaughter. He closed his eyes and saw Sansa's bruised cheek. He remembered Ned's execution, the sense of helplessness. 2 days, then, he said quietly. And so the next 2 days passed in a tense blur. The melee came, a grand affair that saw knights bashing each other with blunted weapons for the amusement of the court. Jon stayed with Ser Roland's retinue on the sidelines, keeping to the shadows. He felt the weight of destiny on him, though he still could scarcely believe any of it. Could a bastard boy from Winterfell truly rise to claim the throne of the Seven Kingdoms? That night, after the melee, the victors were honored in the throne room. Joffrey's mood was volatile, especially as the champion was a hedge knight from the Vale who had little love for Lannisters. But the king forced a smile, presenting a prize purse to the knight. Sansa stood by his side, eyes downcast. Tyrion watched warily from the foot of the throne, while Cersei glared, as though every moment of this was an annoyance. When the formalities concluded, the courtiers broke off into smaller gatherings. Littlefinger discreetly signaled Jon to follow him. They made their way through twisting corridors to a lesser hall near Maegor's Holdfast, where a few lords and knights had gathered. A pair of Reach lords, one Riverland's knight, an older Stormlander, and a couple of others who bore no obvious allegiance. They all looked tense, uncertain. Jon recognized some from the field of battle that day. Littlefinger stepped into the center of the room. "My lords," he said smoothly, "I present to you a chance at changing the fate of the realm. This young man is someone you've heard whispered about, a rumored Targaryen heir, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark." A hush fell. Jon stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. He removed the hood that had concealed most of his face. The men scrutinized him with expressions of disbelief, curiosity, and perhaps fear. One of the older lords scoffed. "He has black hair," he said, "and the Targaryens are silver-haired." Littlefinger smiled as though anticipating the objection. "Not always, my lord. It is said many Targaryens took paramours of different houses, and not all children bore the classic silver hair. Besides, if you recall, the Baratheon line once had Targaryen blood, and they often had dark hair. It is not so implausible. But hair color aside, I've seen documents, and we have the potential to gather more proof that confirm this boy's parentage." Lord Eddard Stark raised him to protect him from Robert Baratheon's wrath. You know how Robert hunted down the Targaryen children, how the Mountain murdered Princess Alya's babes. Jon Snow was kept safe in the north, named a bastard for his own protection. The Lord's eyes flicked to Jon. "That's a fine story, but words are wind, Lord Baelish. Where's the proof?" Varys chose that moment to step from the shadows near the back of the hall. "Here is a small piece," he said softly, holding out a scroll. "This is a letter from the former High Septon, testifying to a secret marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, performed in Dorne. The letter was hidden among the archives, sealed and marked as heretical by the faith under King Robert's reign." He handed the scroll to the gathered lords, who read it one by one, eyes widening. Jon could hardly believe it himself. So Varys had found something after all. The Stormlander lord sucked in a breath. If this is genuine, then, by the laws of inheritance, this boy, if he is indeed that child, has a stronger claim than even Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea. He would be Rhaegar's trueborn heir, the rightful king. Silence held, filled with tension. Then one of the Reach lords cleared his throat. "But how do we know we can trust him? And how do we know if this attempt will succeed? If we fail, Joffrey will have our heads." Jon took a step forward. He forced steadiness into his voice. "I understand your fear, but Joffrey is not the rightful king. He's the product of incest between the Queen and Ser Jaime Lannister. Everyone in this room knows the rumor. He is cruel, he is unfit to rule, and his claim is based on a lie. The realm suffers under his tyranny. If I have a true claim to the throne, I vow to rule justly, to bring peace to the Seven Kingdoms. But I cannot do it alone. If you stand with me, we can overthrow Joffrey. If you do not, then I'll find another way." But I'd rather have lords of honor stand with me now, for the good of the realm." He looked around, meeting each man's eye in turn. He thought of Ned Stark, of all the lessons on honor he had learned at Winterfell. It felt strange to speak of rightful rule when he had never coveted a crown, but the memory of Sansa's bruised cheek and Ned's severed head spurred him on. The men exchanged glances. The Riverlands knight finally said, "The Lannisters torched my lands and murdered my kin. If this is a chance to be rid of them, I'll take it. I'll pledge my sword to you, Targaryen or not. But I'll need to see that you have real power, not just words." The Stormlander nodded grimly. "Robert was my friend, but Joffrey is no Robert. If you have the means to see this done, I'll join. My men are outside the city waiting, but we need to move quickly if this is to succeed." Littlefinger clapped his hands, smiling in triumph. "There we have it. Soon more will join, once they see this is no fool's errand." He turned to Jon. "We should strike tonight as planned. Varys, can you do what you promised?" Varys inclined his head. "The gold cloaks at the mud gate are already primed. Their captain has been promised a substantial sum to support the rightful heir. If we seize control of the palace gates and the royal apartments swiftly, Cersei and Joffrey will have little time to rally defenses. The Kingsguard is formidable, but if we outnumber them, we can succeed. Tyrion might stand aside if he sees the tide turning, or he might try to protect his nephew. That is an uncertainty. We must be prepared." The plan was set in motion. Jon felt as though he were living a dream. They would storm the Red Keep under cover of darkness, using the City Watch to gain entry to Maegor's Holdfast. Joffrey would be confronted, forced to yield. If he resisted, steel would decide the matter. Sansa would be liberated, and Jon would proclaim his lineage before the realm. The lords in the room pledged a small force of men, plus any sympathetic knights from the tourney who could be swayed at the last moment. Varys and Littlefinger parted ways to play their respective roles, leaving Jon alone with the Stormlander, the Riverlands knight, and a few others. They gathered what arms they had, quietly moving them through the darkened streets. The hour of the wolf drew near, and still Jon struggled to believe. Would the small folk rise? Would the gold cloaks truly stand with him? If the plan failed, he would die, and Sansa would face worse torment for his attempt. Despite the swirling doubts, there was no turning back. Jon recalled something Ned Stark had once told him about fear, that it was normal and only those who overcame it could be truly brave. He prayed to the old gods and the Seven for guidance, though he wasn't sure which would listen to a bastard dragon wolf. Ghost was not at his side, lost somewhere in the chaos of the city, but Jon felt a phantom presence, as if the White Wolf's spirit watched over him. As midnight approached, they rallied in a courtyard near the mud gate. The gold cloaks there, under a certain Ser Kylon, had already ousted any men thought loyal to Cersei. Ser Kylon greeted Jon with a respectful nod, though he still looked uncertain. "Lord Baelish has paid me good coin to see this through," he said. "If you're truly a Targaryen, well, I've no great love for the Lannisters. Let's hope your claim is strong enough that we won't all be hanged for treason." Jon forced a confident nod. "We stand together." They marched through the gate, a small band of 100 men, most wearing the cloaks of the City Watch. The streets were quiet but for the occasional whimper of the wind through dark alleys. Lights spilled from taverns in Flea Bottom, where drunken men might not yet notice the quiet soldiers moving past. Once they reached the Red Keep's outer walls, the watchers there looked down from the battlements. The guards called out, demanding to know their business at such an hour. Ser Kylon yelled back that he had orders from the hand of the king, Tyrion Lannister, to bring reinforcements to the keep due to a rumored plot. A risky lie, but plausible enough that the guards lowered the gates. Inside the courtyard, the men dispersed to their assigned tasks. Some hurried to secure the stables and the main gates, others to block the corridors leading to Cersei's chambers. Jon, flanked by the Stormlander Lord and a half-dozen City Watch, headed directly toward the royal apartments where Joffrey and Sansa slept. The plan was to find Joffrey, disarm him, and proclaim Jon's right. If Joffrey refused to yield, they would force a surrender. The Kingsguard would be the main obstacle, But Baelish had told them that only Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt would be on duty tonight, and neither was known for exceptional courage. They slipped up the winding staircase, torches flickering in the stone corridors. The hush was unnerving, broken only by the echoes of footsteps. When they reached Joffrey's door, 2 Lannister guards stood watch. One of them recognized Ser Kylon and hesitated. "What is this?" he began. Ser Kylon struck him across the temple with a weighted mace, knocking him unconscious before he could finish. The other guard fumbled for his sword, but was overwhelmed by the city watch. Jon pushed into the royal chambers. The antechamber was vacant except for a single sleepy squire, who cried out in alarm. The Stormlander lord gagged him. They hurried to the bedchamber door, hearing Joffrey's whine within. Jon's pulse thundered. This was it. He kicked the door open and rushed inside, sword in hand. Joffrey shot upright in his bed, wearing a nightshirt that clung to his scrawny frame. He looked more boy than king in that moment, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror. Beside him sat a crossbow, the same one he liked to point at Sansa. A single Kingsguard knight, Meryn Trant, stood near the window, and he lurched forward, drawing steel as the intruders burst in. But the city watchmen were upon him before he could properly defend. He managed a few desperate parries, but the Stormlander lord's sword took him in the side, and he collapsed with a scream. Joffrey shrieked, scrambling for the crossbow. Jon stepped forward, pressing the tip of his longsword to the boy king's throat before he could ready the weapon. "Surrender," Jon spat. "It's over, Joffrey." The boy's eyes were wild with fear and rage. "Who are you? How dare you?" "I am the king, you traitor bastard." Jon ripped off his hood. "I'm Jon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and your reign ends tonight." Joffrey's face contorted, torn between disbelief and fury. Spittle formed at the corners of his mouth. No, you're lying. You're a filthy whore's spawn. I'm the king. My grandfather Tywin will destroy you." He struggled, but Jon kept the sword pressed at his throat. Behind them, the Stormlander lord dragged the crossbow away from Joffrey's reach. Ser Kylon peered out the door to ensure the corridor was secure. Shouts echoed in the distance. The rest of the keep was being seized. "We have to move quickly," the Stormlander said. Jon grabbed Joffrey by the collar of his nightshirt, dragging him off the bed. "Where's Sansa?" he demanded. "Sansa?" Joffrey spat. "She's mine. She's in her room in Maegor's." His words turned to a squeal as Jon twisted the fabric and pressed the blade harder. Jon turned to the city watchmen. "Take him into custody, but do not kill him yet. We need him to yield publicly." He felt a wave of savage triumph at seeing Joffrey cower. But deep inside, he was still reeling from how surreal it all was. The men hauled Joffrey away, binding his hands. The boy struggled, kicking and spewing curses, but he was no warrior. He was a bully who thrived on power when he had it, but now that it was gone, he was helpless. Jon and the others rushed onward to find Sansa. The corridors were alive with confusion, guards running to and fro, uncertain who was in command. Some city watchmen shouted that the true king was here, fueling more chaos. They reached Sansa's chamber door, where another Kingsguard, Boros Blunt, tried to stand firm. "Stop in the name of the king," he bellowed, voice trembling. Jon raised his sword. The Stormlander lord advanced from the side, while Ser Kylon stepped forward with his mace. Boros glanced over his shoulder, saw he was outnumbered, and threw down his sword. He had no love for Joffrey either, it seemed. Inside the room, they found Sansa curled up in a corner, eyes swollen from crying. She looked up, saw Jon, and gasped. "Jon!" she whispered, disbelief plain on her face. He rushed to her side, gathering her into a quick embrace. She shook in his arms, sobbing in a mixture of relief and fear. "What is happening?" He stroked her hair gently. "We're getting you out of here. It's over, Sansa. The Lannisters won't hurt you anymore. I promise." She clung to him as though she might drown otherwise. He helped her to her feet, noticing the bruises on her arms, the hollowness of her cheeks. Guilt flared, he should have saved her sooner. But at least he was here now. They made their way to the throne room, the seat of power in the Red Keep. Word had spread that a Targaryen pretender had seized the castle. The city watchmen loyal to Baelish or bribed by Varys were corralling the remaining Lannister guards. A few battles raged in distant corridors, but it seemed the element of surprise had largely given them the advantage. Jon entered the throne room, flanked by Sansa, the Stormlander Lord, and a growing number of men. Joffrey was dragged in behind them, cursing and spitting. Tyrion Lannister stood near the base of the Iron Throne, wearing only a hastily thrown-on doublet and a look of stunned amazement. Around him hovered Bronn and a handful of Sellswords, uncertain how to proceed. Jon forced himself to stand tall. The hall was filled with flickering torches and the metallic tang of blood. Joffrey screeched, "Uncle, kill him. He's a traitor. They all are. Where is Mother? Where is the Kingsguard?" Tyrion looked at Joffrey with a mixture of contempt and worry. "Your mother is likely barricaded in her chambers, nephew." Then he turned to Jon, eyes narrowing. "Well, you're not just a scruffy squire, are you? I suspected something was off about you after Bronn's report." His gaze flicked to Sansa. "My lady, are you unharmed?" Sansa managed a small nod. I'm safe now, thanks to Jon." Tyrion took a measured breath. "Jon, is it? Jon Targaryen, if the rumors are true." Jon met his gaze evenly. "Yes, I claim my birthright as Rhaegar Targaryen's heir. Joffrey is no rightful king. I ask you to step aside, Lord Tyrion, and allow this to end without further bloodshed." Tyrion's mouth twitched into a half-smile. "You do sound like a Targaryen, so confident." He looked around at the watchers, at the city watch, at Joffrey's furious face. "Well, it appears you have the advantage for the moment. And I do despise Joffrey. The question is whether supporting you is truly better for the realm or for House Lannister." He gave a short laugh. "But my father is not here, and my sister is quite unmanageable. Perhaps this is the best path forward, though I suspect the realm has just exchanged one war for another." Joffrey howled, "Uncle, you worthless imp! I am the king. Kill them. Kill them all." He lunged forward but was dragged back by two city watchmen. Tyrion sighed. "Nephew, for what it's worth, you are a miserable tyrant. I believe you would have made the realm suffer immeasurably." He turned to Jon. "I won't stand in your way, provided you don't intend to slaughter every Lannister in the city. I have no wish to fight a losing battle." Jon felt a pang of relief. If Tyrion had thrown the Lannister gold behind Joffrey, the night might still have ended in blood. "I have no interest in unnecessary bloodshed," Jon said. "We want Joffrey to yield and step down. If he refuses, he'll be detained. Queen Cersei too, if it comes to that." Tyrion regarded him thoughtfully. "Quite the turn of events. The realm will be in uproar tomorrow." "It's in uproar already," muttered the Stormlander Lord. "Better we settle this with as little death as possible." Suddenly, the doors burst open, and more men poured in. At their head was Peter Baelish, looking triumphant. He strode forward, inclining his head to Jon. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, his voice carrying through the throne room. "We've secured Maegor's holdfast. Cersei and Tommen are barricaded inside, but they have no more than a few guards. Unless you wish to assault them, we can wait for them to surrender." Jon felt all eyes on him. The title Your Grace rang in his ears, alien yet inescapable. He looked at Joffrey, who glowered with terrified fury. "Your choice," Jon said. "Yield and you'll live as a prisoner. Keep struggling and—" He let the threat hang. He wasn't sure he had the stomach for an execution, but Joffrey's crimes demanded justice. Joffrey's eyes darted around frantically. He saw no rescue. His lower lip quivered. Finally, he screeched, "I yield, you filthy whoreson, but I swear my grandfather will have your head, all of you." He was silenced by the blow of a guard's gauntlet fist to his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Jon exhaled, hardly believing it. In the hush that followed, Baelish smiled. stepping to the side so that Jon could ascend the dais to the Iron Throne if he wished. Tyrion watched with a hooded gaze. Sansa hovered at Jon's side, trembling but determined, her hand clutching his arm. Outside, the city might soon erupt in celebration or chaos, or both. Jon took a halting step toward the throne. The twisted swords of past conquests glimmered in the torchlight, each a silent testament to the cost of power. He stopped just short, uncertain if he should sit. For so long, he had only dreamed of being accepted, never of ruling. This had happened so quickly, and yet there was no turning back. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Vengeance for Ned, relief that Sansa was safe, fear for the wars yet to come. Behind him, Baelish spoke again, voice silky. All hail Jon of House Targaryen, the rightful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. Some of the men in the hall knelt, unsure. Others looked around, waiting. Varys, slipping in from a side door, offered a graceful bow, a faint smile on his lips. Tyrion gave a short, ironic bow of his head. Joffrey hissed curses under his breath, but he was forced to kneel by the guards. Jon stood there, heart pounding. Then, slowly, he turned to the crowd. "I do not seek war for war's sake," he said, voice echoing. "But the throne must belong to the rightful king, not a product of lies and cruelty. I promise I will do my best to restore peace to this realm. I will not turn a blind eye to the suffering of the people. If I fail, you may depose me. But for now, stand with me, and we can build a kingdom free of Joffrey's tyranny." It was a clumsy speech, lacking the practiced eloquence of a seasoned ruler, but it carried sincerity. For a moment there was silence. Then the city watchmen began to clap their hands on their spears. It was not the thunderous roar of 1,000 men, but it was a start. Sansa squeezed Jon's arm, her face a mixture of relief and admiration. Tyrion regarded Jon with an unreadable expression, while Baelish's eyes glittered with ambition. Jon looked at the Iron Throne once more, its spikes and edges looming like a monstrous crown in metal form. Slowly, he sank onto it, feeling the cold steel under him. He realized the seat was not comfortable. It was designed so that a king should never rest easily. The first night of Jon Targaryen's reign began in blood and shadow, with the rightful king claiming his seat amidst the downfall of a boy tyrant. Yet as he looked at Sansa's bruised face, at the fear and hope warring in the eyes of the men around him, Jon understood that taking the throne was only the beginning. Ahead lay a tangle of alliances, the anger of Tywin Lannister, the threat of Stannis and Renly, the uncertain loyalty of Robb Stark, and the rumors of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea. But for now, at least for this moment, Joffrey's cruel reign was ended, and Ned Stark's death was avenged. Whether that would lead to peace or to an even bloodier war remained to be seen. But Jon Snow, Jon Targaryen, had taken the first step, and the Game of Thrones would never be the same again. All around the throne room, torches flickered in iron sconces. The tang of blood and sweat hung in the air, and the still forms of a few fallen guards were being dragged away by the more stalwart members of the city watch. Jon remained seated on the Iron Throne, sword across his knees, eyes still fixed on Joffrey kneeling below with his hands bound. Sansa stood at Jon's right, gingerly touching the bruises on her wrists as if unable to believe she was finally free of her tormentor. Peter Baelish hovered at a discreet distance, wearing a smile that managed to be both cunning and welcoming. Tyrion lingered by a pillar, a bemused half-smile playing across his features. And behind him, Varys glided forward on soft slippers, carefully surveying the shifting power in the hall. Outside, muffled shouts and clangs echoed from distant corridors as pockets of Lannister guards continued to skirmish with the city watch. The conflict was not entirely finished. Corners of the Red Keep still harbored men loyal to Cersei or the late King Robert's memory. But the decisive blow had been struck. Joffrey was captured. With that single event, the entire political equation of the Seven Kingdoms had changed. Jon rose from the Iron Throne after a moment of silent reflection. He felt its cold edges beneath him, a seat designed to remind a king never to rest easily. Taking that seat had left him feeling more burdened than triumphant. Still, he forced himself to stand tall, reminding himself that everything he had done, from forging alliances with Baelish and Varys to risking his life sneaking through the Red Keep, was for his family, for his father's memory, for Sansa's safety, and for the realm as a whole. As he stood, half of the men in the room went to one knee. "Guard Joffrey," Jon ordered the gold cloaks who flanked the bound boy king. "He is to be taken to a secure cell. No one is to harm him without my leave." Joffrey spat at Jon's boots. "I'll see you ripped to pieces for this," he snarled. "My grandfather will mount your head on a spike, you." One of the guards gave the boy king a swift blow in the ribs with the haft of his spear, cutting off his tirade. Jon raised a hand. "Don't brutalize him," he said quietly. "He will stand trial. Let us show mercy where he showed none." The gold cloaks glanced at one another, uncertain, but they obeyed. They dragged Joffrey away, his shrieks echoing down the corridor until they faded to nothing. Tyrion exhaled with relief, folding his arms. "If I might suggest, Your Grace," he paused, letting those words linger in the air. It was the first time Tyrion had addressed Jon with the courtesy owed a king. "You should consider sending men to secure the Queen Mother as well. My sister is not the sort to meekly surrender." Baelish arched a thin brow. "We've men guarding Maegor's Holdfast, as I said. She has a few loyal defenders, but she can't hold out for long. I suspect a negotiated surrender is likely if she believes Joffrey is already beaten." Sansa's voice, quivering yet resolute, cut through the tension. "She'll try to hurt Tommen or Myrcella if she thinks it will help her bargain," she said quietly. "I've seen how she looks at them, like pawns on her board." Jon looked at Sansa with concern. "She won't get the chance," he said. Then, with a breath meant to steady himself, he stepped past Baelish. "I'll go speak to her." "Dangerous," Tyrion pointed out. "She's cornered, and a cornered lioness is deadly. Let me go in your stead, or better yet, we send an envoy who isn't so valuable to the realm." Jon shook his head. "If I'm to call myself king, I need to face these threats myself. She'll see a show of strength if I come to her with my men. And if she's going to surrender, better she yield to me directly." Baelish and Tyrion exchanged wary glances but did not argue further. They likely recognized that a Targaryen who dared to act decisively might command more respect than one who cowered behind courtiers. Varys murmured, "I will have some of my little birds accompany you, should matters require a subtle approach." Then he offered a small bow. "Though I hope you won't mind if I remain here and organize matters in the throne room, Your Grace." Jon couldn't help but notice how quickly Varys, too, had adapted to calling him by a royal style. "Do as you see fit," Jon said quietly. "I'll return once it's done." Sansa touched his arm, her face creased with worry. "You'll come back safely?" He gave her a gentle nod. "I will. Stay here with Tyrion and the others. You're safe in their company." Tyrion offered Sansa a faint, reassuring smile. "No harm will come to her on my watch, for what that's worth," he said. "She is, after all, still betrothed to my nephew, though I suspect that arrangement is as dead as King Robert." Jon almost smiled at the black humor, but the moment was too fraught. He gestured for the Stormlander Lord and a small group of City Watch to follow him, as well as a handful of knights who had declared for the rightful Targaryen king only hours earlier. Some of those knights still looked uneasy, as though half expecting Lannister reinforcements to materialize. But so far, the Red Keep had fallen with minimal bloodshed, thanks in large part to bribes paid to crucial sections of the City Watch. They set off through the labyrinth of corridors leading to Maegor's Holdfast. The night was well advanced, and most courtiers had been asleep before the commotion began. Now, torches burned bright, and the hush of the keep felt ominous. Jon could almost hear the tension in every footstep echoing off the walls. At every turn, they found City Watch men or guards uncertain who to obey, only to be told that Joffrey was taken and a new king was crowned. A few tried to resist, clinging to some shred of loyalty to House Lannister, but the sight of so many blades and the knowledge of Joffrey's downfall sapped their will. They surrendered quietly rather than die for a lost cause. At last, Jon and his small band reached the bridge that connected Maegor's holdfast to the main keep. Archers were posted on the far side, and behind them a heavily barred gate. A voice rang out from beyond. "Who dares approach? We are under the Queen's protection. Turn back or we loose arrows." Jon advanced to the edge of the bridge, raising his sword high. "I am Jon Targaryen," he shouted, "the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. I command you to lower your weapons and open the gate. Joffrey has yielded. The Red Keep is ours." A flurry of whispering broke out among the men on the far side. Jon glimpsed a figure in armor step forward, perhaps the officer in command. "We take orders from Queen Cersei, not from some bastard pretender." The man's voice wavered just enough to hint at fear, though he tried to sound resolute. Jon raised his free hand in a gesture of peace. "I have no wish to kill any more good men tonight, but if you do not stand aside, you will share the fate of the Lannister guards who already fell. You serve a queen who is mother to a usurper. That usurper is bound in chains. Surrender and you'll live." The officer hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if hoping for instructions from within. Then a new voice, sharper and full of command, cut through the tension. "Let him come. I'll speak to him." Cersei Lannister appeared in the courtyard behind the gate, flanked by two women in plain dresses, likely her ladies, and Ser Osmond Kettleblack, who wore the gaudy half-armor of someone newly raised to knighthood. Cersei herself looked regal despite the late hour, dressed in a flowing scarlet robe edged with gold thread. Her golden hair was unbound, cascading around her shoulders, and her eyes burned with a mixture of fear, loathing, and cunning. "Open the gate," she repeated. "Or do I have to repeat myself?" The officer barked an order. The men grudgingly lowered the drawbridge and unbarred the gate. Jon and his band stepped forward onto the narrow bridge, hearts pounding. One well-placed arrow might end everything. But Cersei seemed to have no archers knocking arrows. She simply stood there, regal as a statue, her chin lifted. Jon stopped a dozen paces from her. The men at his back fanned out, weapons ready, but Jon kept his sword at his side, the point angled harmlessly downward. "Your Grace," he said, though without deference. "I've come for your surrender." Cersei's lips curved into a bitter smile. "So I see. The bastard has grown bold. You sit on the Iron Throne now, do you? I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You're Ned Stark's ward, or so we believed. A simple boy from the north. But rumor says otherwise." Jon met her gaze evenly. "I'm Rhaegar Targaryen's son, the rightful king. Joffrey is in chains, and the city watch has turned. Do you mean to contest me?" Cersei's composure was remarkable. She clasped her hands over her belly, nails digging into her own fingers. "You claim the throne on the basis of your father's name, a father who started a war that nearly destroyed the realm, if I recall. Rhaegar Targaryen abducted Lyanna Stark and set the rebellion ablaze. But you're young enough to believe in fairy tales, I suppose." Jon's pulse quickened. He remembered the old stories told in Winterfell's halls, that Rhaegar had kidnapped and raped Lyanna. But from what he'd learned since, from what Ned Stark's half-hints and Pycelle's comments implied, it was no kidnapping. It was a hidden marriage, a secret love that turned the realm upside down. Jon forced himself to keep calm. "You want the truth or the propaganda, Cersei? It doesn't matter now. The realm needs peace, and your son gave it none. Let me pass or stand aside and watch men bleed." "I'll not repeat myself." Her eyes flicked over the assembled soldiers, the Stormlander lord near Jon's shoulder, the city watch behind him. For all her bravado, she recognized that her position was untenable. She had, at most, a handful of defenders. Tommen and Myrcella were likely hidden away. Cersei's expression wavered, a glint of desperation in her green eyes. "What of my children? Tommen, Myrcella? You mean to kill them too?" "No," Jon said quickly, though he felt a tremor of anger that she would even think so. "They're blameless in the sins of their mother. They can live in comfort in the Red Keep or be sent to Casterly Rock. But Joffrey must answer for his crimes. Will you yield?" Cersei's lips drew into a thin line. For a heartbeat, She looked as though she might lunge at Jon's throat, nails flashing. Then the moment passed, and she forced a brittle laugh. You think the realm will accept a Targaryen so easily? You think my father will bow to you? Tywin Lannister does not bend. Boy, he breaks. Jon said nothing. Tyrion had warned him that Tywin's retribution could be terrible. The Lannister patriarch might soon march on King's Landing with all his might. But for now, the city was in Jon's hands. If Lord Tywin wants war, let him declare it, Jon said. I'd rather avoid more bloodshed, but that is his choice. Again, I ask, do you yield? She glowered, her breathing ragged. Then she flicked a hand at Ser Osmond, who hovered tensely. Stand down, she muttered. We yield. For now. The men on the courtyard walls lowered their weapons, though they looked none too pleased about it. Some of them glanced anxiously at each other, as if half expecting a slaughter. But Jon had no wish for pointless killing. He gestured to the Stormlander Lord. Secure Maegor's holdfast. See that the Queen Mother and her children remain under guard until we decide what to do next. No harm is to come to them. Then he looked to Cersei again. But you'll come with us so you can confirm to all that you've surrendered. I want the realm to see that this was no bloodbath, but a lawful transition. Her face flared with rage. Lawful transition? You are as deluded as your father, boy. If you want me to watch your farce, I will. But do not expect me to bend the knee. Jon turned away, motioning for his men to lead her back across the bridge. She would not kneel, but in truth, he did not care about her posture. He only cared that she posed no further threat. From what he understood, the real threat lay outside these walls, in the armies that might soon converge upon King's Landing once word of Joffrey's downfall spread. They returned to the throne room by torchlight, with Cersei trailing behind, flanked by 3 gold cloaks. The hall was quieter now than before, though the bodies of the dead guards had been removed, and a handful of newly posted men stood at intervals around the perimeter. Tyrion was seated near the base of the dais, talking quietly with Sansa and Baelish. Sansa sprang to her feet the moment Jon entered. Relief mingled with worry etched into her features. Tyrion pivoted, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Cersei took in the scene with a sneer, pausing halfway across the throne room. She eyed Sansa, who shrank under her gaze. So, you're free of Joffrey's bedchamber now, Cersei observed. You poor, naive little dove. Don't think you'll find happiness here. This new king is just another wolf in dragon's clothing. Sansa flushed but did not flinch. I'd rather trust Jon than you, she said, voice quivering yet determined. Tyrion cleared his throat, stepping between the 2 women. Sister, it seems things have changed. He regarded her with an odd mixture of pity and wariness. If you provoke Jon further, it might end poorly. She aimed a cold glare at him. And where do you stand, brother? Betraying our house so readily? I stand where survival dictates, Tyrion said with a sardonic tilt of his mouth. A lost cause is a lost cause, dear sister. Baelish smiled thinly. We can all discuss loyalties later. For now, the Queen Mother has yielded, and Joffrey is locked away. Shall we prepare an official proclamation of the new king's ascent? Jon mounted the dais again, but he did not sit this time. He looked over the subdued crowd, knights, watchmen, lords who'd pledged themselves. Sansa stood beside Tyrion, trying to be brave in the aftermath of her ordeal. Cersei stood by 2 armed guards, fury smoldering in her eyes. Littlefinger was right. The realm would require a formal notice. If Jon was truly to claim the Iron Throne, the great houses had to hear the news. But that would mean war, or at the very least 100 intrigues branching out across the kingdom. He felt the weight of that future pressing down on him. Yes, Jon said softly. Do that. Let the realm know that King Joffrey has surrendered his crown to Jon Targaryen, rightful heir of Rhaegar Targaryen, by virtue of a lawful claim. State that any lord who keeps faith with me shall be rewarded, and that I desire peace above all. If they choose war, I will meet them, but let them know it's their choice. Sansa stared at Jon with a mixture of awe and worry. Tyrion nodded, as though impressed by the directness. Cersei let out a bitter laugh. "Peace, from the son of the man who started the last great war? The lords will line up to tear you apart," she said. Baelish ignored Cersei's barb. He signaled to a waiting scribe, "Begin drafting at once, and send riders to every corner of the realm, from Dorne to the Wall." Jon exhaled slowly. "Yes, let's be done with it." He felt as though he stood on the edge of a cliff. One push would send him hurtling into chaos. But there was no turning back now. The sun broke over King's Landing the next morning, painting the city's rooftops in shades of gold. Dust motes danced in the air of the throne room, which had become a makeshift war council chamber. Jon sat in the chair typically reserved for the king's hand, refusing for the moment to take the Iron Throne as a seat of casual governance. That felt too symbolic, and he was not ready to sit in it day after day. He'd claimed it in the night's tumult, but now, in the calm light of day, the realm's burdens lay heavily on his shoulders. Around him were gathered Tyrion, Baelish, Varys, the Stormlander lord named Lord Brian Wilde, the Riverlands knight known as Ser Howard Rivers, and a few others who had thrown in their lot. Sansa sat nearby, listening quietly. Outside, the city was in a nervous uproar. Some small folk had begun to celebrate Joffrey's downfall. He had never been popular among commoners, but others eyed the Targaryen claimant with suspicion. Rumors spread that the new king had black hair and might be a bastard. Others whispered that dragons would soon descend on the city or that the Seven Kingdoms would erupt in a war worse than any before. Jon scanned the assembled faces. "Report," he said quietly. Varys was the first to speak, inclining his shaved head. "The city is largely secure. The gold cloaks remain loyal so long as they are paid and see a clear chance of stability. We have posted watchers at each gate." The people stir with curiosity and anxiety, but there has been no outbreak of rioting. Many, it seems, despise Joffrey enough that they're cautiously relieved at his removal. However, we must address the food stores. King's Landing is always on the brink of famine if supply lines are disrupted. If war is coming, we need to secure the grain from the Reach. Baelish tapped his chin thoughtfully. The Reach could be a challenge. Mace Tyrell is far from an imbecile, but he is vain and proud. He sided with Renly Baratheon in the original timeline of the War of the Five Kings. However, with Joffrey toppled, and if we can promise him a favorable marriage or alliance, he might bend the knee to the rightful Targaryen. The Tyrells once supported the Targaryens for centuries before Robert's rebellion. They might be persuaded to do so again, especially if they learn you have a stronger claim than that rumored girl across the sea. Jon frowned. "Daenerys Targaryen," he said, remembering the whispers. "A Targaryen with 3 dragons, if the rumors hold any truth." Varys nodded. "Some say she hatched them in the Red Waste. Others say it's all a myth. Regardless, if the Tyrells believe your claim is more immediate, and if they see you holding King's Landing, they might side with you to regain influence. The key to swaying them could be granting them certain titles or marriages." Jon's mind spun. He had never contemplated forging marriage alliances for political gain, let alone with a powerful family like the Tyrells. But the realm might demand it. "We'll consider that. What of the North? My brother, Robb Stark, has declared himself king in the North. Will he see me as an ally or a rival?" Baelish exchanged a look with Tyrion. "That depends on how the Northern Lords interpret your claim," Baelish said. "They marched south to avenge Eddard Stark and to secure Sansa and Arya. If they learn that Ned Stark's supposed bastard has unseated Joffrey, they may see it as justice done. But they might also worry that the Targaryen claim threatens their independence. However, if you present yourself as both a Targaryen and Lyanna Stark's son, you have Stark blood. You might persuade them you're their kinsman, not an enemy." Sansa's voice came soft. "Robb might be angry you seized the throne, or he might be relieved that Joffrey is no longer a threat. I don't know." She looked down at her hands. "He wanted to free me. Now, well, you have." Tyrion made a contemplative noise. "There's also the matter of Arya Stark, if she's still somewhere in the city or lost on the roads. Lord Eddard's younger daughter disappeared the day of his execution. The North may hold you accountable if she cannot be found. Jon's heart tightened at the thought of Arya wandering alone. He had so little time to search for her in the chaos. Then we search high and low. Varys, can you put your little birds to the task? Varys inclined his head again. I already have, your grace. Jon let out a breath. Good. Now, about the Lannisters. Tywin commands a massive army. What do we know? Lord Brian Wilde cleared his throat. The last we heard, Tywin was at Harrenhal or somewhere near it, trying to keep the Riverlands in check. He'll have to choose whether to march on King's Landing or confront Robb Stark's forces in the field. If he hears that Joffrey has fallen, he might race here to retake the capital, or he might retreat to the Westerlands to regroup. Baelish smiled thinly. In the meantime, we hold the seat of power. The question is how you wish to treat the Lannisters still here in the city. Tyrion is one, but he seems to have placed his fortunes with you. Tyrion shrugged non-committally. Cersei and the children remain your prisoners, and so does Joffrey. What do you intend to do with them? Jon grimaced. A part of him wanted to see Joffrey hanged for Ned Stark's murder, but something in him recoiled at the thought of executing a boy, albeit a sadistic boy, without a proper trial. For now, keep them under guard, he said. They will face the king's justice in due time. I want the realm to see that we're not savage usurpers. Let Joffrey st. and trial for his crimes, and let him answer to the people he wronged. Tyrion frowned. My father won't like that. He might prefer to see the capital burned rather than watch his grandson publicly tried. Jon didn't flinch. Then Tywin can negotiate or he can bring war. We'll prepare for either possibility. For now, see that Joffrey and the others are not harmed, but they do not leave their quarters without my leave. He paused. I'd like to speak with Joffrey alone at some point, though. There are questions only he can answer. Baelish's brows rose, as if intrigued, but he did not comment. Very well. We'll see to it. Next matter, then, gold. The Iron Throne is deep in debt to the Iron Bank of Bravos. With the Lannisters in disfavor, we'll need funds. I've arranged for certain creative methods to keep the city watch paid, but that will only last so long. Jon's frustration flared. He knew nothing of royal finances. Do what must be done, so long as it's not theft or cruelty. Collect taxes from the wealthy or negotiate new loans. We can't have the city watch turning on us if we can't pay them. He turned to Tyrion. You were named Master of Coin by your father, if I recall. Will you continue in that office under my rule? Tyrion laughed dryly. That depends on whether I survive this. But yes, if you wish, I can handle the books and the bank. Just know that my approach might not always be gentle. And your new hand of the king will have to keep a close watch. Jon rubbed his temples. The realm's finances can't wait. Very well. Baelish, remain Master of Coin for now. Tyrion, I may call on your expertise. I've no illusions about how easy this will be. Baelish's eyes glittered. As you say, your grace, I remain at your disposal. Jon nodded, though he felt uncomfortable with how smoothly Baelish seemed to take to the new regime. Peter Baelish always had an agenda. Jon had never discovered precisely why the man was so willing to engineer Joffrey's fall. Aside from personal ambition, he would have to watch Baelish carefully, or else end up dancing on the mockingbird strings. At length, they concluded the council. The plan was set in rough outlines. Secure the city, contact the great houses with news of Jon's coronation, extend an olive branch to the north, begin negotiations with the Reach and, if possible, the Stormlands, and prepare for possible attack from Tywin Lannister. The City Watch would remain loyal so long as they were paid. The prisoners, Joffrey, Cersei, Tommen, and Myrcella, would be kept under close guard, while any surviving members of the Kingsguard would be watched for treachery. Sansa was free at last, though her immediate future was uncertain. The day dragged on with a series of small audiences. Representatives from merchant guilds came to bow and scrape, wanting reassurance that the new king would not disrupt trade. Minor courtiers and knights who had once served Robert or Joffrey arrived to offer hesitant fealty, or to test Jon's resolve. Jon was forced to pretend a confidence he did not always feel. He took his seat on the Iron Throne only once, for a short hour, to receive a line of petitioners. And though he wore no crown, he had yet to retrieve the old Targaryen crown or have a new one forged. Everyone in the throne room addressed him as Your Grace. Sansa remained close by, observing with wide eyes, still haunted by her captivity. She occasionally met Jon's gaze, and he would offer a faint, reassuring smile. He worried about her. She'd suffered humiliation and abuse at Joffrey's hands, and that sort of trauma did not vanish overnight. Yet for now, she was safe. He made certain that a comfortable set of chambers was prepared for her in the Red Keep, guarded by men he believed loyal. He placed a pair of hand-picked women from the north in her service, found among the small retinue that had come south with Ned Stark. By evening, Jon had not yet found time to check on Joffrey directly. Instead, he found himself forced to preside over a supper in the small hall, where loyal lords gathered for a meal meant to celebrate the new regime. The event was subdued, with half the benches empty. Even those present looked uneasy, as though they expected a Lannister raid at any moment. Wine was poured, toasts were made, but they felt hollow. Jon forced himself to speak politely, to greet each lord and knight who had sworn fealty. Yet his nerves felt raw by the time the plates were cleared. Once the hall had emptied, leaving only a few servants to tidy up, Jon caught sight of Sansa slipping away down a corridor. He followed, quietly calling her name. She turned, her eyes wary. When she realized it was him, her shoulders relaxed. "Jon," she said in a low voice. "You've become so different. Feels like a dream. Is it truly you? Or am I imagining you're my brother?" Jon felt an ache in his chest. "I'm still me," he said gently, stepping closer. "The name might be different, but I remember Winterfell. I remember the times you'd sing in the courtyard, or how you used to scold Arya for not being ladylike." Her face tightened at the mention of Arya, tears threatening. "Gods, I wish she were here. I wish Father were here. This is all so strange." He touched her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. "It is, but I'll do everything I can to keep you safe now. I promise." He hesitated. "If you want to return to Winterfell when it's safe, you can. Or you can stay here with me. I won't force you either way." Sansa swallowed, her gaze drifting. "I don't know where I belong anymore. Mother and Robb are in the north, yet we've heard nothing of them for moons. And now you're king." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry if I sound ungrateful. You saved me. But my mind is all in a tumble." He nodded, gently squeezing her hand. "I understand. Take your time. Rest tonight. I'll have the maids bring tea if you wish. We'll talk more tomorrow." She looked down, nodding. "Thank you, Jon." Then she gave him a quick, tentative embrace, as if needing to reassure herself he was real. He held her briefly, feeling the tremor in her body, then let her go. She wiped at her eyes and hurried away down the corridor. Jon stood there for a moment, staring after her. Each passing hour reminded him how unprepared he was for the role he now played. He yearned for the simplicity of the Wall, of training as a ranger, or even the quiet life at Winterfell where he was only the bastard. The boy he had been was gone, replaced by a Targaryen king with more foes than friends. Taking a steadying breath, he headed toward the tower that housed the cells, determined to speak with Joffrey at last. A cluster of gold cloaks stood guard at the entrance, torches lighting the stairwell. They recognized Jon immediately and bowed. He ordered them to open the door. The dank smell of stale straw and moldy stone wafted out. Jon descended the spiral steps, boots echoing on the worn steps. At the bottom, a pair of men with spears indicated which cell housed the former king. Jon nodded curtly and waved them back. The cell door was reinforced with iron bars, a single slot for passing food. A torch sconce on the wall cast flickering light across the corridor. Through the bars, Jon could see Joffrey hunched in the corner, arms wrapped around his knees. The boy's golden hair was disheveled, and his nightshirt was smeared with grime. He looked up at the sound of Jon's steps, eyes flashing with hatred. "Come to gloat, have you?" Joffrey hissed, voice edged with the last remnants of bravado. "You'll regret putting me here. My grandfather will hang you all." Jon grabbed the torch from the sconce, stepping closer to the bars so he could see Joffrey's face clearly. The anger that welled up inside him was intense, remembering how Joffrey had tormented Sansa, had laughed at Ned's execution. But he forced himself to speak evenly. "I want answers," he said. "Why did you have Ned Stark executed when he'd confessed to treason? Did you do it to prove yourself? Or did someone influence you?" Joffrey bared his teeth, a petulant scowl twisting his features. "You think I have to explain myself to you? Eddard Stark was a traitor. He tried to steal my throne." Jon's grip on the torch tightened. "He tried to protect me. If you had let him take the black, none of this might have happened." Joffrey sneered. "I am the king. I was the king. That traitor deserved death for questioning my parentage, for meddling in my affairs." Jon stared at him, frustration mingling with sorrow for Ned. "So it was your choice alone. You disobeyed your mother's counsel, your advisors, everyone, so you could show the city you were strong. Is that it?" Joffrey snorted, though fear flickered in his eyes. "What do you care? He's dead, and now you and I will see who ends up the victor. You've seized my throne, but you won't keep it. Grandfather will come with an army. You have no idea what you're doing." Jon fought the urge to lash out. He stepped back, letting the torchlight cast Joffrey's shadow against the wall. "I wanted to hear it from you," he said slowly. "Now I have. You deserve whatever judgment awaits you." Then he turned away, placing the torch back in its bracket. "Food and water will be provided, but nothing more. If you need a healer, you can call for one. Otherwise, you stay here until your trial." He signaled to the guards that he was done. Behind him, Joffrey's voice rang out in a high, furious pitch. "You're the traitor, Snow. Do you hear me? You're nothing but a bastard with a stolen name. I'll see you burn." Jon did not look back. He climbed the stairs, each step punctuated by the heavy feeling in his chest. He wanted justice for Ned, for Sansa, for all those who suffered under Joffrey's rule. But he found no satisfaction in seeing the boy caged like an animal. The entire business was sordid and tragic, the product of lies and cruelty. He only hoped that by wresting the throne away from Joffrey, he had saved the realm from further torment. Yet he knew this was not the end. Were loomed. The seats of power in the Seven Kingdoms would not simply bow to him because he carried Targaryen blood. Once back in the upper corridors of the Red Keep, Jon found Tyrion waiting near a window embrasure, gazing out over the city by moonlight. The dwarf turned at the sound of Jon's footsteps. "Ah, there you are. Did you enjoy your talk with my nephew?" Jon's lips thinned. "It was as expected. He's defiant and hateful." Tyrion nodded. "And you're feeling guilty for stooping to his level by imprisoning him, yes? Or for perhaps wanting to do even worse?" Jon was too tired to dodge the question. "I don't feel guilty about imprisoning him, but I don't feel triumphant either." Tyrion sighed. "Such is power. It rarely brings joy. If you're waiting for the moment you feel like a hero, you'll wait forever." Jon leaned against the wall. "I know. For so long, my dream was to be a ranger in the Night's Watch, to protect the realm from wildlings and worse. Now I'm here, and everything's changed. I worry I'm not ready." Tyrion studied him, the torchlight dancing in his mismatched eyes. "Let me give you a little advice, Your Grace. Nobody is truly ready for power. We simply do what we must, for good or ill, and hope we don't become monsters in the process." Joffrey leapt into monstrousness with both feet because he thought it made him strong. "If you can keep your conscience intact, you'll be a better king than any we've had in a very long time." Jon glanced down the corridor, where a gold cloak stood at attention. "Why did you decide to support me, truly?" he asked. "You could have fought or fled." Tyrion offered a wry smirk. "I weighed the odds, and Joffrey, well, let's say I never liked him. As for my family, my father will do as he pleases. I have no particular desire to die for his ambitions, nor for my sister's twisted plots. At least with you, there's a chance the realm might find some measure of justice. I find that preferable to madness." Jon nodded, appreciating Tyrion's bluntness. "Thank you," he said softly. Tyrion made an offhand gesture. "Oh, don't thank me yet. We've only just begun. Tywin Lannister, Stannis Baratheon, Renly Baratheon, Robb Stark, Balon Greyjoy. The realm is full of ambitious men, and we've just painted a target on your back." He cast a final look out the window. "Best get some rest, Your Grace. Tomorrow we'll have 1,000 new problems." Jon watched Tyrion walk away, the echo of his footsteps fading down the corridor. He felt impossibly weary, as though days had passed in the span of hours. The burdens of a king indeed weighed heavily. Yet he pushed away from the wall, determined to make a few final rounds before turning in. He had to check that the city watch was properly posted, that Sansa was settling in safely, and that no urgent messages had arrived. 2 days after Joffrey's fall, a hush settled over King's Landing. People knew that a new king sat on the Iron Throne, but they had yet to see him. Whispers spread that he was a handsome youth with dark hair and the blood of a dragon, or that he was an impostor conjured by the machinations of Lord Baelish, or that he was a terrifying warlord who would feed the disloyal to dragons. The small folk, weary of turmoil, mostly kept their heads down and prayed that bread prices would not rise further. Within the Red Keep, Jon made a point of appearing on a balcony overlooking the yard where the city watch trained. He watched as the gold cloaks drilled in neat ranks. When they caught sight of him, many stopped to bow or salute uncertainly. Jon raised a hand in acknowledgement, though he felt awkward under their stares. He thought of his father, no Ned Stark, though not by blood, who had often advised a lord must show himself to his people, so they knew him and he knew them. Jon resolved that once matters settled, he would tour the city, see its streets, speak to its folk. But that day was not yet at hand. A flurry of ravens arrived instead, bearing news from multiple fronts. The first was from Stannis Baratheon, who declared that Joffrey was a product of incest and that the Iron Throne was rightfully his as the elder Baratheon brother. The tone of his message was harsh and unyielding. He made no mention of Jon's Targaryen claim, only calling him another usurper who had illegally seized the capital. With typical Stannis stubbornness, he demanded that Jon relinquish the throne or face righteous battle. The second was from Renly Baratheon, who had crowned himself and gained the support of much of the Reach. Renly's letter was more courteous, acknowledging the possibility that Jon might be a Targaryen with a rightful claim, but also stating that the realm needed a Baratheon king to avoid a return of the Targaryen tyranny. He invited Jon to negotiate, implying that if an arrangement could be reached, perhaps even a marriage alliance, he might cede the throne in favor of uniting forces against Stannis. Or so it vaguely hinted. The third letter came from Robb Stark's camp. It was short, written in Robb's own hand. It thanked Jon for saving Sansa and for avenging Ned Stark's death, but it took no official stance on his claim to the Iron Throne. Robb wrote that he remained king in the north, intent on securing northern independence. He expressed hope that peace could be brokered between them, given their shared Stark blood. "For you are as much Ned's son in spirit, if not by blood, and you remain my brother in all ways that matter." The letter ended by asking after Arya and whether Jon had found any trace of her. The subtext was clear. While Robb bore no hostility toward Jon personally, the North would not simply kneel to a Targaryen again. Lastly, there was a raven from none other than Walder Frey, offering sly words of potential alliance if Jon would grant the Freys certain privileges and titles in the Riverlands. Jon grimaced. Even in this new timeline, Walder Frey was sniffing for advantage. Jon laid the letters out on a table in the small council chamber, where Tyrion, Baelish, Varys, Sansa, and Lord Wilde had gathered again. "So," Jon said, running a hand through his dark hair, "everyone wants a piece of the realm. Stannis condemns me, Renly invites negotiation, Robb is neutral, and Walder Frey is... Walder Frey." He sighed. "And no word from Tywin yet?" Varys clasped his hands. "None, Your Grace, but we can assume he knows what happened. He will respond soon." Tyrion tapped the parchment from Stannis. "We can ignore Stannis for the moment. He sits at Dragonstone with a small force. He might muster more men in the Stormlands, but his claim lacks popular appeal. Renly, on the other hand, has the Tyrell host behind him. That is a much larger concern. Sansa looked up. Renly was kind to Marjorie Tyrell, I remember hearing that. He's betrothed or wed to her, is he not? Baelish made a non-committal gesture. He is. That union cements the alliance with Highgarden. If the Tyrells bring their full strength to bear, that's the largest army in the Seven Kingdoms, short of a united North and Riverlands. Jon massaged his forehead. And we can't let them march on us. Our hold on the city is still tenuous. But if we attack them first, that's a gamble as well. Renly is offering negotiations. Should we take him up on it? Tyrion exhaled. If he's sincere, perhaps. You might form an alliance, though that would mean sharing power, or at least granting the Tyrells extravagant rewards. Marrying Marjorie is a possibility, if you're willing. Jon stiffened. The notion of marrying someone he had never met for political gain felt alien to him, but it might be the price of securing the throne and preventing more bloodshed. He glanced at Sansa, who watched him carefully. He remembered how she'd once been promised to Joffrey, and how that turned out. Would he do the same to Marjorie for the sake of power? The thought unsettled him, but he couldn't dismiss it lightly. I'll consider the possibility, he said quietly. Lord Wilde coughed. And what of the North, Your Grace? If Robb remains king in the North, that's a wedge in the realm. The other great houses might see that as a weakness in your authority. Jon stared at Robb's letter. He says he wants to avoid conflict with me if possible. He's my brother. I won't war with him if it can be helped. Perhaps we can find a solution that grants the North some measure of autonomy while still recognizing the Iron Throne. Or if that fails... He trailed off, unwilling to voice the specter of war with Robb. It was unthinkable, but so was letting the realm shatter further. Baelish's eyes danced with calculation. It might be wise to return Sansa to her family as a gesture of goodwill. That alone could open the door to an alliance with Robb. One that merges Targaryen authority with Northern loyalty. If you release her to his care and do something symbolic, like acknowledging the North's special status or something along those lines, it might keep him out of the fray. Sansa startled slightly at the mention of sending her away. I would like to see Mother and Robb again, she murmured, though she shot Jon a questioning look. But do you want me to go? Jon looked at her gently. Only if you wish it, Sansa. But it might help keep the peace with Robb. You deserve to be with your family, after all you've endured. She hesitated, her expression conflicted. Part of me longs for Winterfell more than anything. But part of me wants to stay and make sure you're safe. Everything is so uncertain. He wanted to tell her she need not worry, but that would be a lie. The realm was beset by foes. Think on it, he said softly. We won't rush the decision. Robzel. Eddard doesn't demand your return immediately. We'll see how negotiations go. As they discussed these matters, a page hurried into the room, bowing awkwardly. Your Grace, my lords, the Queen Mother begs an audience. She's been confined to her chambers, but she insists on speaking with King Jon. She says it's urgent. Jon exchanged a glance with Tyrion. The dwarf shrugged. She's probably plotting some scheme, Tyrion said, but perhaps it's wise to at least hear her out. Varys's expression was serene. Shall I have the guards accompany you, Your Grace? Jon stood. Yes, I'll hear what she has to say. He turned to the others. Continue making plans. We can't dawdle forever. We must send replies to Stannis, Renly, and Robb soon. And we need eyes on Tywin's movements. They all inclined their heads, though Baelish watched Jon go with a curious smile, as if trying to guess how he might handle Cersei Lannister. Sansa looked worried, but she said nothing. The page led Jon and a pair of guards to the tower where Cersei was kept. She had been granted a decently furnished chamber rather than a dungeon cell. Jon had made that concession because she was, after all, the mother of the king she claimed had reigned lawfully. A handful of gold cloaks stood outside the door, crossing their spears at Jon's approach. They parted to admit him, then closed the door behind him. Cersei was seated by a tall window, wearing a deep green gown embroidered with gold lions. Her face was pale, her hair pulled back from her face in a severe style that highlighted the circles under her eyes. She turned as Jon entered, her gaze flicking to the guards. "Send them away," she said, voice calm. Jon shook his head. "They stay." She pressed her lips together. "Fine. I asked you to come because I received a raven from my father. He managed to get it to me through one of his agents in the city." She lifted a scrap of parchment from a nearby table, waving it gently. "He knows of Joffrey's capture. He demands my release and Joffrey's restoration to the throne, or he will march on King's Landing. He warns that if you harm a hair on Joffrey's head, he will burn the city to the ground." Jon steeled himself, meeting Cersei's gaze. "I expected nothing less from Lord Tywin. Is that all?" She studied him with cool appraisal. "He also says that if I can find a way to kill you and free Joffrey, I should. Obviously, that part is not surprising either." Jon felt a flicker of warning. Was she telling him this to gain his trust, or to throw him off guard? "Why tell me?" Cersei stood, gliding across the chamber with cat-like grace. "Because I see how the wind blows. My father may be unstoppable, but even he cannot easily take a city that has turned against House Lannister. The gold cloaks and the commoners might not fight for us, especially if there's a Targaryen on the throne. And there's more. Renly Baratheon grows stronger by the day. Tywin may have to face him or Robb Stark first." Jon watched her carefully, mindful of the possibility of a hidden knife. "So you'd rather parley with me than rely on your father's armies to storm the gates?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You misunderstand if you think I have illusions about your willingness to let me live. But my children, Tommen, Myrcella, and yes, even Joffrey, matter more to me than any petty hatred. If my father attacks, King's Landing could become a battlefield. My children's lives would be at risk. So I propose an alternative. Allow me and my children to leave the city with your blessing, and we will not oppose you publicly. Tywin can rage if he wishes, but if I'm no longer in your custody, it might defuse the immediate crisis." Jon did not miss the implication that Joffrey would leave as well. "Joffrey is to stand trial," he said firmly. "He's responsible for Ned Stark's death. I will not let him run free." She arched a brow. "A trial? On what grounds?" "He was the rightful king, anointed by the High Septon. And do you think your trial will stop Tywin from marching?" Jon clenched his jaw. "So you only want Tommen and Myrcella?" Cersei's eyes flickered with emotion. "I want all my children, but if you insist on keeping Joffrey in chains, so be it. What if you release Myrcella and Tommen to me, and we go to Casterly Rock? I'll leave Joffrey behind if that's the price of peace. He's my son, but he made his bed when he ordered Ned Stark's death. I would save him if I could, but not at the cost of my other children's lives." Jon was momentarily taken aback by her pragmatism. He had believed she would cling to Joffrey above all else. "You'd abandon Joffrey?" A trace of bitterness marred her features. "If I remain here, Tywin will come. War will erupt in the streets, and who knows if I or my children survive. Joffrey might die in the battle or be executed if you're overrun. At least if I leave with Tommen and Myrcella, I might preserve them." Jon's thoughts whirled. If he let Cersei take Tommen and Myrcella, it might remove a point of leverage with Tywin. On the other hand, holding children hostage was a cruel tactic, and it might push Tywin to desperation. Furthermore, Myrcella was innocent, a bright young girl who had never harmed anyone. Tommen likewise. Did he want them to grow up in cells? "What guarantee do I have that you won't rally an army or incite Tywin to greater violence once you're free?" he asked. Cersei inclined her head. "None. But if I wanted you dead right now, I'd have tried to kill you in the night. I'm telling you Tywin's plans because I want to avoid an immediate siege. If you let Tommen and Myrcella come with me, I'll do what I can to dissuade my father from direct assault. I have no illusions, though. He may still fight, but at least my children won't be in your line of fire, and you won't be using them as bargaining chips." Jon said nothing for a long time, weighing his moral instincts against the cold calculus of power. The notion of holding Tommen and Myrcella as hostages for leverage felt distasteful, Yet was it not a necessary step to keep Tywin at bay? He recalled how Robb had captured Jaime Lannister in the original timeline of the war, using him as a bargaining chip. That approach had its merits, but it also invited betrayal. Finally, Jon spoke. "I'll consider your request. In the meantime, you remain here under guard until I decide." Cersei huffed, arms crossing. "As you wish, King Jon." The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable. "Decide soon, or Tywin will decide for you." Jon turned and knocked on the door for the guards to let him out. As he left, he felt Cersei's gaze boring into his back like daggers. The guards barred the door again, leaving her inside. Walking away, Jon realized that if she was being honest, a major confrontation might come sooner than expected. Perhaps releasing the younger children would indeed save many lives, or perhaps it would seal his doom. He could not tell which. He only knew that each decision now had massive consequences. He made his way back to his own quarters, mind aflame with questions. When he arrived, he found Ghost waiting in the corridor. Somehow, the direwolf had turned up in King's Landing, having slipped away during the chaos of Ned Stark's arrest, only to surface again now. The sight of Ghost waiting there, white fur glowing in the lamplight, brought a surge of emotion. Jon dropped to a knee and buried his fingers in the wolf's thick ruff. Ghost pressed his muzzle against Jon's shoulder, making a soft sound of recognition. For a moment, Jon closed his eyes, letting the presence of his direwolf remind him of simpler days. Then he stood, pushing open the door to his chamber. Ghost followed, and Jon latched the door behind them. He sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion catching up. The events of the past days whirled in his mind. Joffrey's fall, the uncertain alliances, the looming war. He thought of Ned, of how his father, no uncle, must have carried burdens of leadership at Winterfell. Jon recalled that Ned had always seemed calm, resolute, though he bore the secrets of Jon's parentage in silence. Now Jon understood the weight that shaped Ned's quiet stoicism. His future stretched before him like a labyrinth. Renly wanted negotiations, Stannis demanded the throne, Robb was king in the north, Tywin threatened war, and there was still talk of Daenerys Targaryen across the sea. Not to mention the threat beyond the wall that the Night's Watch always warned about: White Walkers, Whites, the encroaching darkness. Was that threat still real, or had it been overshadowed by the Game of Thrones? Jon let out a weary sigh and rested his head in his hands. Ghost settled at his feet, silent and watchful. In the flickering candlelight, Jon felt sleep tug at him, but he fought it off a moment longer. He considered how far he'd come from the boy called Snow to a king called Targaryen. The name felt both alien and strangely fitting. He thought of his mother, Lyanna Stark of Rhaegar Targaryen, the father he never knew. He remembered the times he'd gazed upon the statue of Lyanna in the crypts at Winterfell, wondering who she was, never suspecting that her blood flowed in his veins. Eventually, weariness overcame him. He lay down on the bed, letting his sword rest nearby, and closed his eyes. Ghost curled up on the floor, vigilant. Jon drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with scattered dreams. Images of a silver-haired man playing a harp, of Lyanna's voice whispering his name, of Ned's solemn face, of the Iron Throne forging itself anew from molten steel and surrounding him on all sides. He dreamt of Sansa's bruised face, of a shadow with the shape of a wolf and a dragon merged, and of an icy wind howling from the north. In the deepest part of that dream, he saw a great weirwood tree, its face weeping blood, and heard the echo of a voice older than time. "You must be the shield, the sword, the fire or darkness will consume all." He woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The candle had burned low, the hour late. Ghost stood at once, ears pricked, sensing Jon's distress. For a long moment, Jon stared at the small, flickering flame. He felt fear coil in his gut, fear that the real fight had only just begun. The next morning, the real work of ruling resumed. Jon donned a plain tunic of black and red, colors reminiscent of House Targaryen. He joined Varys, Baelish, and Tyrion in the small council chamber to finalize the letters that would be sent to Renly and Stannis. Sansa, her hair neatly brushed and her posture poised, arrived as well, quietly determined to stand at Jon's side. "We should address Renly first," Baelish said. "He's the more likely ally. Stannis is inflexible and devout. He'll never accept a Targaryen on the throne without a fight." Jon nodded. "Let's propose a parley. If he's open to diplomacy, I'll consider meeting him. We can see if there's a path to avoid war." Tyrion frowned, drumming his fingers on the table. "And if he demands you abdicate in favor of him? Then we refuse," Jon said. "If he wants peace, we can discuss terms, shared governance, or some arrangement that meets both our needs. But I won't step aside. I have a legitimate claim." Baelish gave a sly smile. "Mention the possibility of uniting your houses in marriage. That will catch his attention." Jon's stomach twisted. "I'll mention that we're open to alliances, though I won't promise anything until we've met in person." Varys's soft voice chimed in. "As for Stannis, perhaps we reassure him that we share a common enemy in the false claim of Joffrey Lannister. No offense, Lord Tyrion. We might suggest that if Stannis stands down, you would be open to appointing him as your hand or granting him Dragonstone and Storm's End with some autonomy. That might soothe his wounded pride." Jon agreed, albeit reluctantly. "Yes, let's do that, though I doubt Stannis will accept. He seems determined to claim the throne himself. But I'll extend the olive branch. That's all I can do." Next came the matter of the North. Tyrion tapped a quill on the parchment. "You must reply to Robb Stark. He is your brother in a sense, but he's also a separate king if he insists on that. How do we handle that contradiction?" Jon met Sansa's eyes briefly, then looked at the parchment. "I'll acknowledge him as king in the North for now," he said, surprising Baelish, who raised his eyebrows. "If it keeps the peace, so be it. But I will request safe passage for all travelers loyal to me, and I'll offer an alliance. We share enemies in the Lannisters, well, the branch outside these walls, and any others who might threaten us. I'll express my gratitude for his stance in avenging Ned and in seeking to rescue Sansa. Maybe we can build from there." Baelish gave a low chuckle. Recognizing Robb's kingship might create a precedent that the realm is truly fracturing. But perhaps it's a wise short-term concession if it keeps him off your back. Sansa beamed with quiet relief. "Thank you, Jon. That might heal some of the hurt the North feels. They loved Father deeply." Jon nodded, forging ahead. "Finally, as for Walder Frey, we'll reply politely but promise nothing. I don't trust him. Keep him at arm's length." They wrote out the letters, each carefully phrased. Jon signed them with a hand that trembled only slightly, affixing a seal that Baelish had prepared for him. A stylized dragon's head combined with a wolf's profile, referencing Jon's unique heritage. It felt odd to see that sigil pressed into hot wax. He wondered how many new banners might be sewn with that symbol in the coming weeks. Ravens were dispatched, and with that, the lines of negotiation were drawn. Jon would wait for answers, though he expected some lords would reply by steel rather than ink. A hush of tense expectation fell over King's Landing, as if the city held its breath, waiting to see which armies would move first. Over the next few days, various minor tasks demanded Jon's attention. He oversaw a reorganization of the king's household guard, replacing those of questionable loyalty with knights and men who had either joined him willingly or had no reason to betray him. He arranged modest relief for the city's poor, distributing grain from the royal stores at reduced prices to prevent riots. It earned him a small measure of goodwill among the small folk, though it strained the treasury further. He also took time to walk the city, accompanied by a handful of guards and Ghost padding silently at his side, to see the conditions for himself. Even in their uncertain state, the people recognized him. Some cheered, some bowed, some whispered, but no one spat or jeered as they had for Joffrey. That alone told Jon how unloved Joffrey had been. Whether they would love a new Targaryen king was yet to be seen. Throughout these days, Sansa gradually seemed to mend. She walked in the gardens, took meals with Jon and the newly forming court, and sometimes smiled in that gentle way he remembered from Winterfell. Yet shadows of her ordeal lingered. She startled at sudden noises and grew pale when anyone mentioned Joffrey. Jon encouraged her to write to Catelyn, which she did, pouring her heart onto parchment. He only wished they could truly be reunited soon. On the fourth day, Tyrion informed Jon that a messenger from Tywin Lannister had arrived at the gates. That set the entire Red Keep ablaze with rumor. The messenger was a young knight of the West, wearing the lion sigil on his cloak. Jon received him in the throne room, surrounded by gold cloaks and the knights loyal to him. Cersei was brought in, guarded, to observe. Joffrey remained in his cell, presumably for his own safety as well as everyone else's. The knight, Ser Harold Payne, stepped forward and bowed stiffly. "I bring Lord Tywin's terms," he said, voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts to appear composed. Jon sat on the iron throne for the occasion, the presence of Ghost beside him unsettling many watchers. "Speak, then," Jon said, keeping his tone even. Harold unrolled a parchment. "Lord Tywin Lannister, Shield of Lannisport, Warden of the West, demands the immediate release of King Joffrey Baratheon, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister, and all members of House Lannister held in King's Landing. He further demands that this so-called Jon Targaryen lay down arms and submit to King Joffrey's rightful authority. In return, Lord Tywin will spare the city from the ravages of war and may allow the pretender to take the black, provided he swears an oath never to claim the throne again. Refusal shall result in a swift and merciless siege upon King's Landing." A hush fell. Many watchers exchanged glances, some stifling laughter. Did Tywin truly believe such a demand would be accepted, given that Joffrey was already deposed? Jon leaned forward, resting his hands on the arms of the throne. The edges pressed uncomfortably against his sides, a reminder of the cost of rule. "Is that all?" he asked softly. Ser Harold swallowed. "My lord also states that if any harm befalls Joffrey, he will repay it 100-fold. Jon let the silence linger, letting the weight of the Iron Throne fill the hall. Then he said, "I will give you my terms in return. Tell Lord Tywin that Joffrey stands accused of regicide, treason, and murder. He will be granted a fair trial. If Lord Tywin chooses to march against King's Landing to free him by force, it will be Lord Tywin who dooms the city to bloodshed, not I. As for the rightful claim, let your lord know that I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and the Iron Throne is mine by birthright. If he chooses war, so be it. But know this, the gold cloaks are not on his side, the small folk do not love him, and the houses he expects to rally may choose otherwise when they see how the wind blows." Ser Harold's face turned ashen. You refuse to yield?" Jon nodded. "I do. Go back to your master, Ser Harold, and tell him I am willing to talk, if he acknowledges my claim and refrains from violence. If not, we will meet him in battle." A stunned silence followed. Then Ser Harold bowed stiffly, turned, and marched out of the throne room. The watchers let out a murmur of talk as soon as he was gone, but Jon raised a hand, silencing them. "Clear the hall," he commanded. They obeyed. When the hall was empty except for his trusted advisors, plus Cersei with her guards, Jon rose from the throne. He felt a pang in his muscles from sitting so tensely. "Well," he said, looking at Tyrion, Baelish, and Varys, "we have our answer. Tywin means war unless we free Joffrey." Baelish dipped his head. "And you won't free Joffrey, so war it is." Varys's gentle sigh filled the space. "This could mean bloodshed on a scale we've not seen since Robert's rebellion." Tyrion frowned. "He has the resources of the Westerlands. We cannot easily match that unless we secure alliances. This is why the Tyrell's stance matters so much. If Renly stands with us, Tywin might think twice before committing to an all-out attack on King's Landing, especially if Robb remains a threat to his flank." Cersei lifted her chin. "So you will let my father smash you, or you'll cower behind the Tyrells like a frightened child." Jon met her gaze. "Or we find a solution that doesn't require smashing. But if Tywin insists, I'll do what I must." She shook her head, lips curving into a bitter smile. "My father will not bend to a bastard Targaryen. You had your chance, boy." With that, she turned and walked away, her guard trailing behind, though they did not let her go far. Jon closed his eyes for a moment, This was the reality of kingship, two unyielding forces on a collision course. And he was at the center of it all. He too, a steadying breath, recalling his vow to protect the realm and save it from tyranny. If that meant facing Tywin Lannister's wrath, so be it. Yet a part of him longed for the quiet honor of the Night's Watch, far from the entanglements of southern politics. He looked at those gathered. Tyrion, Baelish, Varys, Sansa. Each had their own reasons for supporting him. Each might betray him one day, except perhaps Sansa, who was his sister in all but blood. "We'll prepare the city for siege if we must," Jon said grimly. "At the same time, we'll do everything possible to secure allies. If Renly or Robb will stand with us, Tywin might think twice." Baelish inclined his head. "A wise approach, Your Grace. I'll send fresh messengers to the Reach to ensure they know the stakes." Varys folded his hands. "And I'll see if I can glean any insights from our spies about Tywin's troop movements." Tyrion's smile was thin. "I shall oversee the city's defenses. The walls must be manned, the wildfire caches inventoried. Not that I trust the pyromancers, but we may need everything." Sansa reached out to touch Jon's arm, her voice gentle. "We'll get through this, Jon." He covered her hand with his, taking heart in that small warmth. "Yes," he murmured, "we will." And so the days continued. Missives flew, alliances were bartered, lines were drawn. Joffrey remained in the dungeons, growing ever more vile-tempered. Cersei glided through her confinement, occasionally requesting an audience with her children, who were kept in comfortable but guarded rooms. Tyrion labored to fortify the city, while Baelish worked to spin the events of Joffrey's fall into a narrative favorable to Jon. The small folk gossiped, bandying names like the Bastard Dragon or the Wolf of Targaryen. Some even took to calling him Aegon the Black, though Jon had never claimed that name. Amidst it all, Jon did his best to remain just, to keep his moral compass. He remembered Ned's lessons about mercy, about hearing the petitions of the lowliest subject. Each day, he found an hour to walk among the people, accompanied by Ghost. Over time, fear receded and curiosity grew. Some dared to approach to ask if he would truly protect them from Lannister cruelty and from war. He promised to try. He was no liar, but he could not guarantee that Tywin would not attack. All he could do was prepare. On the 10th day after Joffrey's fall, the replies from Renly and Stannis arrived. Stannis's was as expected, a flat refusal to acknowledge Jon, repeating that the Iron Throne was his by the laws of succession after Robert's death. There was no mention of a compromise. Stannis demanded that Jon yield or be destroyed. Renly's letter was more nuanced. He thanked Jon for the offer of parley and stated that he would be riding north with a portion of the Tyrell forces to meet him near the Mander. If Jon was willing to come south with a moderate escort, they could negotiate on neutral ground. The letter hinted that Renly would consider acknowledging Jon's Targaryen blood if certain conditions were met, including a possible marriage alliance with Margaery Tyrell and recognition of the Baratheon's claim to Storm's End and the Stormlands. He insisted that, as Robert's younger brother, he had a role to play in shaping the realm's future. But he did not foreclose on Jon's claim outright. Jon felt a surge of relief. Renly's willingness to talk might be the key to preventing Tywin's all-out assault. If he could gain the Tyrell's support, the combined forces would be formidable. Even Tywin might not wish to face that. Thus, Jon decided to accept Renly's invitation. He would ride south with a small retinue, Tyrion, a few knights, and perhaps Sansa if she wished. The city would remain under the watchful eye of Lord Wilde, Baelish, and Varys in his absence. Preparations began at once for the journey. Word spread through King's Landing that the king would depart to negotiate an alliance. Most people hoped it would avert war. Some fretted that it might expose the city to Lannister retaliation, but Jon left behind enough gold cloaks to hold the walls, along with Tyrion's cunning plans for defense. Cersei, Joffrey, and the other Lannister hostages would remain locked up, to ensure that Tywin did not attempt anything rash in the king's absence. Sansa ultimately decided she would accompany Jon, if only to see the outside world again and perhaps glean news of their mother or of Arya along the way. Jon had reservations about bringing her into potential danger, but she insisted. "I can't bear to sit alone in these halls any longer," she said, her eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "I'll be safe by your side." Jon relented. He also decided to bring Ghost, as ever, trusting the direwolf's keen senses. The morning they left, a modest column of knights and horses gathered in the Red Keep's courtyard. They wore cloaks in the new colors of House Targaryen, black and red, though a few wore the sigils of their own houses. It was a far cry from the massive retinue a king might normally command, but Jon wanted to move swiftly and not provoke suspicion. Renly had demanded a similarly small escort as a guarantee of good faith. Tyrion arrived mounted on a stout pony, clad in well-fitted armor that gleamed in the dawn light. He gazed up at Jon, who sat astride a dark charger. "Off to parley with a pretender while another pretender hunts us, and a third pretender refuses to bend," Tyrion quipped. "A simpler man might lose his mind." Jon smiled wryly. "A simpler man might never have seized the throne in the first place." Tyrion barked a short laugh. Sansa, wearing a blue travel cloak, rode a gentle mare next to Jon. She glanced behind at the walls of the Red Keep, relief plain on her face at finally leaving the place where she'd suffered so much. Baelish and Varys stood by to see them off, along with Lord Wilde. Baelish bowed with a flourish. "Good luck, Your Grace. We'll keep the city in hand. May the gods grant you a fruitful negotiation." Varys added a more sincere nod. "Safe travels. My little birds will keep me informed of your progress, if that suits you." Jon gave them each a final look. "Keep watch for Tywin, and if word comes from Robb or any sign of Arya, send a raven at once." With that, Jon signaled his horse forward. The party rode out through the Red Keep's gates, down the winding streets toward the city's main gate. The small folk turned out to watch them pass, some cheering, some merely gawking. A few flower petals were tossed at their feet, reminiscent of how the people once hailed King Robert in his youth. Jon couldn't help but wonder how many of those petals had also been thrown for Joffrey once upon a time. The city was fickle. They passed under the massive portcullis and out into the countryside beyond. The morning sun gilded the fields, and a cool breeze carried the scent of grass and distant water. Sansa breathed in deeply, a tremor of relief escaping her. Ghost padded along beside Jon's horse, eyes watchful. And so they set forth toward the Mander, toward Renly Baratheon and the Tyrells, toward a parley that might decide the fate of King's Landing and the Seven Kingdoms. Jon felt the weight of it all in every breath. Tywin's looming armies, Stannis' righteous fury, Robb's precarious independence, the uncertain loyalty of the realm, and the unknown threat beyond the narrow sea. But for now, with the open road ahead and a chance at peace on the horizon, he allowed himself a single moment of quiet hope. If diplomacy could avert a terrible war, if he could prove himself worthy, then perhaps this risky journey would be worth every step. He pressed his knees to the horse's flanks, guiding it forward at a steady trot. Tyrion followed, looking pensive. Sansa, for the first time in moons, let the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Behind them rode a small column of men ready to fight or guard, depending on how fortune turned. Above them all, the sky opened bright and blue, as if offering possibility. In that moment, Jon silently prayed to the old gods and the Seven that the realm might be spared further carnage. Thus did Jon Targaryen, once called Snow, ride into the uncertain dawn of his reign, no longer a hidden bastard but a king poised between war and peace, guided by a burning desire to protect those he loved, and haunted by the knowledge that the hardest choices still lay ahead.